When the train stopped, her dreams died. But a stranger's promise changed everything. Eleanor Hayes stepped off that train in 1885 carrying two secrets: a letter promising marriage and a baby she couldn't hide much longer. But the man who'd vowed to be her husband, he was already 6 feet under. Stranded, pregnant, and alone in the Montana wilderness, she had nowhere left to run until a blue-eyed rancher made her an offer that would either save her life or break her heart forever. Stick with me until the very end of this story, and please comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Montana Territory, casting long shadows across the weathered platform of Silver Creek Depot. Eleanor Hayes pressed her gloved hand against the cool window of the train car, watching as the dusty little town came into view through a haze of steam and smoke. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm that had become all too familiar during the 7 days she'd spent rattling westward from Philadelphia. 7 days of pretending. 7 days of smiling politely at fellow passengers who asked where she was headed, why she traveled alone, whether she had family waiting. 7 days of lying through her teeth while her corset grew tighter and her secret grew heavier with each passing mile. The train lurched as it slowed, and Eleanor's hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, concealing the gentle swell beneath her traveling dress. 5 months. She was 5 months along, and the evidence was becoming harder to hide despite the careful layering of her clothing and the strategic draping of her shawl. Silver Creek Station, the conductor called out, his voice carrying through the car. Final stop for passengers heading to Silver Creek. Eleanor rose on unsteady legs, gripping the seat back for support. Around her, other passengers gathered their belongings. Miners heading to the gold fields, a family of homesteaders with sun-weathered faces, a salesman with his cases of wares. Normal people. People with normal lives and normal reasons for being here. Not like her. Not desperate and ruined and running from a scandal that would have destroyed what remained of her family's reputation in Philadelphia society. She reached for her carpet bag, the only possession she'd brought beyond the clothes on her back and the few precious items wrapped in her spare dress. Everything else, her mother's silver, her books, the little watercolor paintings she'd done of the city she'd once called home, had been sold to pay for her train ticket west, to pay for her escape, to pay for the chance at a life where no one knew her shame. The train jolted to a complete stop, and Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. In her reticule, tucked against her side, was the letter. She'd read it so many times over the past 3 months that she could recite it from memory, but she pulled it out anyway, unfolding the creased paper with trembling fingers. Dear Miss Hayes, your letter arrived as an answer to prayer. I am a plain-spoken man, so I will be direct. I need a wife, and you need a new start. That seems a fair bargain to me. I own 300 acres of good grazing land outside Silver Creek, Montana. The ranch is profitable but lonely. I am 32 years old, in good health, and of decent character. You can ask anyone in town. I don't drink to excess, I don't gamble, and I keep my word. I understand from your letter that you seek a fresh beginning away from Philadelphia. I will not pry into your reasons. Every person deserves the chance to start over, and I promise you will find no judgment here. If you agree to this arrangement, send word and I will meet your train on the 15th of October. We can be married that same day if you're willing. I may not be the husband of any girl's dreams, but I will provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect. Yours truly, Henry Callahan. Eleanor's eyes stung as she folded the letter again. Henry Callahan. A stranger who'd offered her salvation without knowing the full truth of what he was accepting. She'd written back immediately, her reply carefully crafted to sound grateful without revealing too much. She hadn't told him about the baby. How could she? How could she put words to paper confessing that she'd been foolish enough to believe Daniel Whitmore's promises? That the young law clerk who'd courted her so ardently had disappeared the moment she'd tearfully revealed her condition? That his wealthy family had threatened to destroy the Hayes name completely if Eleanor dared to claim their son had ruined her? No, she couldn't write those words. Instead, she'd crafted a vague response about circumstances that made remaining in Philadelphia impossible and seeking a new life where the past wouldn't follow. She'd hoped, God, how she'd hoped, that Henry Callahan would be too much of a gentleman to ask questions. And she'd prayed that by the time her pregnancy became obvious, they'd be married long enough that any gossip would die quickly. A premature baby, people would whisper, but at least she'd be a respectable wife by then. At least her child would have a name and a home. At least they'd both be safe. "Miss, you'll need to disembark now." The conductor appeared beside her, his expression kind but firm. "This is the end of the line." "Yes, yes, of course." Eleanor grabbed her bag and moved toward the door, her legs feeling like water beneath her heavy skirts. The Montana air hit her face as she stepped onto the platform, dry and sharp, completely different from the humid atmosphere of Philadelphia. The sky stretched impossibly wide overhead, a brilliant blue unmarred by the factory smoke she'd grown accustomed to back east. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the mild October weather. It was beautiful, harsh, and wild, and beautiful. And somewhere in this vast, unforgiving landscape was the man who'd promised to marry her. Eleanor scanned the platform, searching for a tall figure. Henry had mentioned in his letter that he stood over 6 feet, or perhaps someone holding a sign with her name. The platform was crowded with people greeting arriving passengers, but no one seemed to be looking for her. Her pulse quickened. Perhaps he was running late. Perhaps he'd been delayed at the ranch. She stood there, clutching her bag, as the crowd slowly dispersed. Families reunited and walked away arm in arm. The miners headed toward the saloon across the street. The homesteaders loaded their belongings onto a wagon, and still, no one approached her. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Eleanor's hands began to shake. "Excuse me, miss?" A young man in dusty ranch clothes approached, his hat in his hands. He couldn't have been more than 19 with a sunburned face and worried eyes. Are you Miss Eleanor Hayes from Philadelphia?" Relief flooded through her. Yes, I am. Are you?" "No, ma'am." He twisted his hat between his fingers. "I'm Tommy Price. I work for the Callahan Ranch. Or, I did." His voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Callahan sent me to meet you." Eleanor's relief curdled into confusion. "He sent you? But I thought, ma'am, I'm real sorry to be the one to tell you this." Tommy's young face was stricken with genuine grief. "Mr. Callahan, Henry, he passed on 3 days ago. Horse threw him up in the north pasture, broke his neck. He was dead before we could even get him back to the house." The world tilted sideways. Eleanor heard the words, understood their meaning, but couldn't quite make them feel real. Dead. Henry Callahan was dead. The man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry, the stranger who'd offered her salvation, was dead. "No," the word came out as a whisper. "No, that can't be right. I have his letter. We had an arrangement. Her voice broke. "I came all this way." "I know, ma'am. I'm so sorry." Tommy looked like he might cry himself. "Mr. Callahan was a good man. Best boss I ever had. The whole town's torn up about it. We buried him yesterday, up on the hill, overlooking his ranch. Just like he always said he wanted." Eleanor couldn't breathe. Her corset was too tight, the air too thin, the sky too big and too bright and crushing down on her from every direction. She'd gambled everything on this arrangement, her reputation, her future, her child's legitimacy. And now she had nothing. She was alone in a strange town, pregnant and penniless, with no prospects and no way home even if she'd wanted to return to Philadelphia, which she couldn't. Her aunt had made it clear that Eleanor was no longer welcome in polite society. The family had already endured enough scandal when Eleanor's father drank himself to death and left them with nothing but debts. An unwed pregnant niece would be the final straw. "Miss Hayes?" Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Miss Hayes, are you all right? You've gone awful pale." Eleanor tried to speak, but her throat had closed up. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. The platform swayed beneath her feet. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. "Whoa there, easy now." The voice was deep and steady, with a slight western drawl that softened the words. "Tommy, get her bag. Let's get this lady somewhere she can sit down before she faints dead away." Eleanor found herself being guided firmly but gently toward a bench at the edge of the platform. Her legs moved automatically, following the direction of those steady hands. She was lowered onto the wooden seat, and someone pressed her head down toward her knees. "Breathe slow," the voice instructed. "That's it. In and out. You've had a shock." Gradually, the black spots receded. Eleanor's vision cleared, and she found herself staring at a pair of scuffed leather boots and denim-clad legs. Slowly, she raised her head. The man crouched beside her was tall, even in that position. She could tell he'd tower over her when standing. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark blonde hair that needed a trim. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear blue, like the Montana sky above them, and filled with a concern that seemed entirely genuine. "Better?" he asked quietly. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm Gavin Mercer. I own the ranch that borders Henry's land." He spoke slowly, as if sensing she needed time to process information. "Tommy here came to find me when he realized you'd be arriving today. I came along to help however I can." "Mr. Callahan is dead," Eleanor heard herself say, as if speaking the words might make them less surreal. "Yes, ma'am. I'm real sorry. Henry was a good neighbor and a better friend." Gavin's jaw tightened briefly. "It was a senseless accident. One moment he was riding along like he'd done 1,000 times, and the next, a rattlesnake spooked his horse." Eleanor closed her eyes. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "Miss Hayes, may I ask, do you have other family? Anyone we should contact?" Gavin's voice remained gentle. "Or funds for a return ticket east?" She shook her head mutely. Speaking the words aloud, admitting just how desperate and alone she truly was, felt impossible. "I see." Gavin was quiet for a moment, studying her with those too perceptive blue eyes. Then he straightened to his full height, which was indeed considerable. "Tommy, take Miss Hayes's bag over to the parsonage. Tell Mrs. Fletcher we have a guest who needs a room for the night." "Yes, sir, Mr. Mercer." Tommy grabbed the carpet bag and hurried off, clearly relieved to have something useful to do. Gavin extended his hand to Eleanor. "Come on, let me see you safely to the parson's house. It's not much, but Mrs. Fletcher is kind, and she won't ask questions you're not ready to answer." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand. Everything in her wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was painfully obvious. She couldn't. She had nowhere to go, no money, and no options. She was completely at the mercy of strangers in a strange land. Slowly, she placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was warm and solid as he helped her to her feet. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "Nothing to thank me for yet," Gavin replied, but there was no harshness in his tone. "Let's just get you somewhere safe first. Then we'll figure out what comes next." They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Silver Creek. The town was small, much smaller than Eleanor had imagined, with a main street that couldn't have been more than 3 blocks long. A general store, a saloon, a bank, a church with a white steeple. Everything a frontier town needed, nothing more. People stopped to stare as they passed. Eleanor could feel their curious gazes tracking her expensive traveling dress, her Eastern style, her obvious connection to the tragedy everyone already knew about. Whispers followed in their wake. "Don't mind them," Gavin said quietly. "Small town means everyone knows everyone's business. But they're good people, mostly. They'll help if you need it." Eleanor doubted that very much, but she was too exhausted to argue. The parsonage was a neat white house next to the church with a small garden out front where late-season roses still bloomed. Mrs. Fletcher met them at the door, a plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flower on her apron. "Oh, you poor dear," she exclaimed the moment she saw Eleanor. "Tommy told me what happened. Come in, come in. You look ready to drop." The interior was simple but spotlessly clean, with embroidered samplers on the walls and the smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Fletcher ushered Eleanor into a small sitting room and pressed a cup of tea into her hands. "I'll have a room made up for you right away," she said, patting Eleanor's shoulder. "You just rest here and drink that tea. Everything will look better after a good night's sleep." Eleanor wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that statement, but she was afraid if she started, she might never stop. Instead, she sipped the tea and tried not to think about anything at all. Gavin stood near the doorway, his hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. After a moment, he spoke. Miss Hayes, I know you've had a terrible shock, and I don't want to add to your distress. But I need to ask, did you come all this way with no contingency plan at all? No funds set aside in case things didn't work out? Eleanor's cheeks burned with shame, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. I had enough money for the train ticket, that was all. My family, they couldn't help beyond that. I see. He was quiet for a long moment. And you can't return to Philadelphia? No. Her voice was barely audible. There's nothing for me there. Gavin studied her face, and Eleanor had the uncomfortable feeling he could see far more than she wanted him to. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. Henry's ranch is still there. Someone will need to decide what to do with it. Sell it, probably, since he didn't have any family. But that will take time. In the meanwhile, his housekeeper and hands are still there, keeping things running. He paused. You could stay there if you wanted, just temporarily, until you figure out your next steps. Eleanor's head snapped up. I couldn't possibly. That wouldn't be proper. It's a big house, and Mrs. Chen, that's the housekeeper, is a very respectable chaperone. Besides, it seems to me Henry meant for you to have a home there. Circumstances changed, but he shrugged. Maybe it doesn't have to change completely. You're very kind, Mr. Mercer, but I can't accept charity. Eleanor's voice trembled despite her best efforts. I have no way to repay. It's not charity, Gavin interrupted gently. Henry was my friend. Helping you is the last thing I can do for him. And honestly, having someone at the house would be better than leaving it empty. These things have a way of deteriorating fast when no one's living in them. Eleanor wanted to refuse. Every ounce of pride she had left screamed at her to turn down this offer, to find some other solution that didn't involve accepting help from a stranger. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Just for a few days, she heard herself say. Until I can find work, or something. Gavin's expression softened. Just for a few days, he agreed, though something in his tone suggested he knew as well as she did that a few days wouldn't be nearly enough time to solve her problems. That night, lying in the narrow bed in Mrs. Fletcher's guest room, Eleanor finally allowed herself to cry. She pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the sobs that racked her body. One hand clutched protectively over her belly where her baby, her secret, her burden, her precious responsibility continued to grow. What was she going to do? She couldn't stay at Henry's ranch indefinitely. Even with a chaperone, people would talk. And soon, so soon, her pregnancy would become obvious. Then what? She'd be thrown out, shunned, exactly as she would have been in Philadelphia. She and her baby would be destitute, and in a frontier town like this, destitute meant death. Maybe that would be for the best, a dark voice whispered in the back of her mind. Maybe dying out here in the wilderness would be easier than facing a lifetime of shame and struggle. But then the baby moved, a gentle flutter against her palm, and Eleanor's tears came harder. No matter what happened to her, she couldn't give up. This child was innocent. This child deserved a chance at life. She would find a way. Somehow she would find a way, even if she had no idea what that way might be. Morning came too soon, announced by a rooster crowing somewhere nearby and sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. Eleanor rose stiffly, her eyes swollen from crying, and dressed carefully in her second-best gown, a simple gray wool that would be more appropriate for a ranch setting than her traveling dress. She was just pinning up her hair when a knock sounded at the door. "Miss Hayes," Mrs. Fletcher's cheerful voice called. "Mr. Mercer is here to take you out to the Callahan Ranch when you're ready. There's breakfast downstairs." Eleanor's stomach twisted with anxiety, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "Thank you. I'll be down shortly." Breakfast was a simple meal of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, but Eleanor could barely taste it. She was too aware of Gavin Mercer sitting across the table, eating in silence while Mrs. Fletcher bustled around them, chattering about the weather and the upcoming harvest festival, and anything else that seemed to cross her mind. Finally, Gavin pushed back his plate and stood. "We should probably head out, Miss Hayes. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch, and I'd like to get you settled before noon." Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight for words. The wagon waiting outside was simple but sturdy, pulled by two well-matched bay horses. Gavin helped her up onto the seat with the same gentle courtesy he'd shown the day before, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They rode in silence for the first 15 minutes, the wagon rattling along a dirt road that cut through an endless expanse of golden grassland. The mountains Eleanor had seen from the train platform were closer now, their massive forms dominating the western horizon. "It's beautiful here," Eleanor said finally, more because the silence was becoming uncomfortable than because she had any real interest in making conversation. "It is," Gavin agreed. "Takes some getting used to, though, especially for someone from back east. The winters are hard, and the isolation can wear on a person. Henry used to say that's why he wanted a wife, someone to share it all with, good and bad." Eleanor's throat tightened. "It's unfortunate that he died before he could have that." "Yes." Gavin was quiet for a moment. "Henry was a good man, honest, hard-working, fair to his employees. He didn't deserve to go out like that." "Had he lived alone for long?" "About 5 years. He came out here from Ohio after his father died and left him a small inheritance. Used it to buy the land and build up the ranch. Did well for himself, too." Gavin glanced at her. "He talked about you, you know, after he got your letter agreeing to come. He was excited. Nervous, but excited. Kept worrying about whether the house was nice enough, whether you'd be disappointed." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. She'd been so focused on her own desperate situation that she hadn't really thought about Henry Callahan as a real person with hopes and fears of his own. He'd been planning for her arrival, preparing to welcome her, maybe even imagining what their life together might be like. And now he was dead, and she was alone again. "I wish I'd had the chance to meet him," she said softly. "So do I," Gavin replied. "I think you would have liked each other." They crested a low rise, and Gavin pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is, the Callahan Ranch." Eleanor looked out across the valley below them. A sturdy log house sat nestled against a grove of cottonwood trees, with a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings spread around it. Cattle dotted the pastures beyond, and a creek glinted in the sunlight as it wound through the property. It was exactly the kind of place Eleanor had imagined when she'd read Henry's letter. Solid, established, safe, a home. "It's lovely," she whispered. "Henry worked hard to make it that way," Gavin said. He clicked to the horses, and they started down the slope toward the ranch. As they drew closer, Eleanor could see more details. The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, 2 stories, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Someone had planted flowers along the porch railing, though they were starting to fade with the approaching winter. Curtains hung in the windows, and smoke drifted from the chimney. A woman emerged from the house as they pulled into the yard. She was small and Asian, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and an apron tied around her waist. "Mr. Mercer," she called out, her English accented but clear. "Tommy said you were bringing Mr. Callahan's bride today." "This is Miss Hayes," Gavin said as he helped Eleanor down from the wagon. "Miss Hayes, this is Mrs. Chen. She's been keeping house for Henry for the past 3 years. Mrs." Chen's sharp eyes assessed Eleanor quickly, then softened with sympathy. "Come inside, miss. You must be exhausted from your journey. I have tea ready and a room prepared." Eleanor followed the older woman into the house, Gavin trailing behind with her bag. The interior was just as well appointed as the exterior had promised. Solid furniture, clean floors, a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. Someone had made an effort to make it feel like a home rather than just a bachelor's dwelling. Henry had done this. Henry had prepared all of this for her. The grief that hit Eleanor then was unexpected in its intensity. She'd never met the man, but in that moment she mourned him as if she'd known him all her life. He'd been her last hope, her salvation, and now he was gone. "The bedroom is upstairs," Mrs. Chen was saying. "Mr. Callahan had it specially prepared. New curtains, new quilt. He wanted everything to be nice for his bride." Eleanor couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. She simply nodded and allowed herself to be led up the stairs to a spacious bedroom with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the valley. "I'll leave you to rest," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Call if you need anything." When she was alone, Eleanor sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. The quilt beneath her was indeed new, pieced together in a simple star pattern with cheerful blue and yellow fabrics. A man's hands had selected these colors, imagining what his unknown bride might like. The sob that escaped her was involuntary. Then another, and another. Soon she was weeping again, not just for herself and her situation, but for Henry Callahan, who died before his dreams could come true. She cried until she was empty, until there were no more tears left. Then she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, her hand resting on her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby growing inside her. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was bringing you to safety, but now I don't know what will happen to us." A knock on the door frame made her sit up quickly, wiping at her face. Gavin stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm sorry to intrude, Weck," he said, "but I wanted to talk to you before I head back to my own place." Eleanor straightened her spine, trying to salvage some dignity. "Of course." Gavin stepped into the room but maintained a respectful distance. "Miss Hayes, I'm going to speak plainly because I think you're in a situation where plain speaking is more useful than pretty words." Her heart sank. "You want me to leave?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "I meant what I said about you staying here. But I need to understand your situation better if I'm going to help you figure out what happens next." Eleanor's hands twisted together in her lap. "I don't understand what you're asking." Gavin studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but direct. "Miss Hayes, you're pregnant, aren't you?" The world stopped spinning. Eleanor's mouth opened, but no words came out. She wanted to deny it, to lie, to protect her secret for just a little longer. But the look in Gavin's eyes told her there was no point. He already knew. "How?" she managed to choke out. "I've run a ranch for 12 years, Gavin said gently. "I know the signs. The way you hold yourself. The way you touched your stomach when you thought no one was looking. The fact that you came all this way to marry a stranger with no backup plan at all." He paused. "I'm guessing that's why you needed a fresh start so badly." Shame burned through Eleanor like wildfire. She couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I shouldn't have come here under false pretenses. I'll leave. I'll find somewhere else to—" "Stop." Gavin's voice cut through her rising panic. "You're not going anywhere. Not today, anyway. But you know now, you know what I am. I'm desperate, frightened, alone." Gavin moved closer and crouched down so he was at eye level with her. "Miss Hayes, Eleanor, you're not the first woman who's found herself in trouble through no real fault of her own, and you won't be the last. What matters now is what you do next." Eleanor forced herself to look at him through her tears. "What can I do? Even if I stay here, people will figure it out soon. Then they'll force me to leave and I have nowhere to go. My baby will be born in disgrace and we'll probably both die before—" Her voice broke completely. Gavin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were slow and deliberate, as if he was thinking through each one carefully. "What if you didn't have to leave? What if there was a way for your baby to be born with a name and a home and no questions asked?" Eleanor stared at him, not understanding. Gavin took a deep breath. "Afterwards, Henry built this ranch for you. He wanted a wife and a family. Those things are still needed, even though Henry's gone." "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and absurd and yet completely serious. Eleanor shook her head. "That's not— You can't possibly—" "Why not?" Gavin's blue eyes were steady on hers. "You need a husband and a home. I need—" He paused, seeming to consider his words. "I need help running my ranch, and I could use a wife for that. It would be a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience." "You don't know me," Eleanor whispered. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're brave enough to travel 2,000 miles alone. I know you're desperate enough to marry a stranger for the sake of your child. And I know you're honest enough that lying to me about your condition is eating you up inside." He straightened up. "That's enough for me to know you're a decent person in a bad situation. But the baby isn't yours. Everyone would know—" "Would they?" Gavin's tone was practical. "We get married today or tomorrow. In a few months, a baby comes early. People might whisper, but they'll never know for certain. And frankly, most folks won't care. This is the frontier, Eleanor. We judge people by what they do, not where they come from." Eleanor's mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. Men didn't just offer to marry pregnant strangers out of kindness. There had to be a catch, some hidden motive she wasn't seeing. "Why would you do this?" she demanded. "What do you get out of it?" Gavin smiled slightly. "A wife, a family, a full house instead of an empty one. Those are worth quite a bit out here." His expression grew more serious. "Look, I'm not going to pretend this is some romantic gesture. I'm 33 years old, and I'm tired of coming home to silence every night. I've been thinking about finding a wife for a while now, but I'm not good with words or courting. A practical arrangement suits me just fine." "This is insane," Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Gavin agreed. "But it solves both our problems, doesn't it? You get a home and a name for your baby. I get a wife and eventually a family. We help each other." Eleanor looked around the room, at the quilt Henry had chosen, at the window overlooking the valley, at the solid walls that promised safety and shelter. Then she looked down at her hands, folded over the place where her baby grew. What choice did she really have? She could refuse, try to make her own way, and almost certainly end up dead or destitute before winter came. Or she could accept this impossible offer from a man she barely knew, and at least give her child a chance at life. When she looked up at Gavin again, she tried to read his face, to see if there was any hint of cruelty or deception lurking behind those steady blue eyes. But all she saw was patience and a kind of quiet determination. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "what would you expect from me? What kind of wife would you want me to be?" Gavin considered this. Honest, respectful, willing to work hard. Beyond that, he shrugged. "We'd figure out the rest as we go, I suppose. I'm not asking for love, Eleanor. Just partnership." "And the baby?" "Will be mine in every way that matters." His voice was firm. "From the moment we marry, that child will have my name and my protection. No one will ever have cause to question that." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. "You would really do that? Take on another man's child as your own?" "Yes." The simple certainty in that single word broke something open in Eleanor's chest. For the first time since Daniel Whitmore had abandoned her, someone was choosing to stand by her. Someone was offering her not pity, but partnership. It wasn't love, it wasn't romance, but maybe in this harsh and beautiful land it was something better, honesty and mutual respect and a shared determination to survive. "Then yes," Eleanor heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." The words had barely left Eleanor's lips when reality crashed over her like a wave. She'd just agreed to marry another stranger, a man she'd known for less than 24 hours, in a desperate gamble that felt simultaneously insane and like her only possible choice. Gavin's expression didn't change much, but something softened around his eyes. "All right then. I'll ride into town and speak with Reverend Fletcher. If he's available, we could do this tomorrow morning. That gives you tonight to be certain of your decision." "Tomorrow?" Eleanor's voice came out higher than she intended. "That's so soon." "The sooner we marry, the less questions people will ask later." Gavin's practicality was almost jarring. "But if you need more time—" "No." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. "No, tomorrow is fine. You're right. There's no point in waiting." Gavin nodded once, then turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the frame. "Eleanor, for what it's worth, I'll do right by you. I give you my word on that." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the stairs, and Eleanor was alone with the magnitude of what she'd just committed to. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the window, watching as Gavin emerged from the house below and strode toward his horse. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, swinging into the saddle with practiced grace. Within moments, he was riding away across the golden grassland, growing smaller against the vast Montana landscape until he disappeared over a rise. Eleanor pressed her palm against the cool glass. In less than 24 hours, that man would be her husband. She would be Mrs. Gavin Mercer. Her child would be born as his child. Her entire future had just shifted in a direction she never could have anticipated when she boarded that train in Philadelphia. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. Mrs. Chen stood there with a tea tray, her weathered face kind but curious. "Mr. Mercer said you'll be staying," the housekeeper said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "He said I should make you comfortable and help with whatever you need." "Thank you." Eleanor's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Mrs. Chen, may I ask you something?" "Of course, miss." "What kind of man is Gavin Mercer? Truly?" Mrs. Chen poured tea with steady hands, considering her answer. "Mr. Mercer is a good man, fair, honest. He helped Mr. Callahan many times when he first started this ranch, lent him equipment, gave advice, never asked for anything in return." She handed Eleanor a cup. "He works hard, maybe too hard. His ranch is bigger than this one, and he runs it mostly alone except for a few hired men during busy seasons." "Is he—" Eleanor hesitated. "Is he kind?" "To those who deserve kindness, yes. To those who don't." Mrs. Chen's lips curved slightly. "Last year, a man came through selling sick cattle, trying to pass them off as healthy. Mr. Mercer found out and made sure everyone in 3 counties knew not to do business with that man again. He doesn't tolerate cheating or cruelty." Eleanor sipped her tea, absorbing this information. It aligned with what she'd observed herself. Gavin Mercer seemed to be a man of strong principles and direct action. Whether that would make him a good husband remained to be seen. "Mrs. Chen, there's something else you should know." Eleanor set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Mercer and we're getting married tomorrow." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose, but she recovered quickly. "I see. That is very soon." "It's complicated." Eleanor couldn't meet the older woman's eyes. "I need a husband, and he's willing to provide that. It's a practical arrangement." "Many good marriages start with practical arrangements," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "My own marriage was arranged by my family. I met my husband only twice before our wedding, but we built a good life together for 32 years, until he passed." She began collecting the tea things. "Love can grow from respect and partnership, miss. Sometimes that's a stronger foundation than passion." After Mrs. Chen left, Eleanor unpacked her meager belongings. The process took less than 10 minutes. She had so little to show for 23 years of life. 2 dresses besides the one she wore. A spare set of undergarments. Her mother's silver-backed hairbrush, the only thing of value she'd kept. A small Bible her grandmother had given her. And at the bottom of the bag, wrapped carefully in a handkerchief, a tiny pair of knitted booties she'd made herself during the long train journey west. She held the booties in her palm, marveling at their smallness. In a few months, these would fit her baby's feet. Her child would be born here, in this house, and would grow up running through these valleys with the mountains watching over them. If everything worked out, if Gavin kept his word, if Eleanor could somehow make this impossible situation work. The afternoon stretched long and strange. Eleanor tried to rest but couldn't settle. She explored the house instead, familiarizing herself with what would soon be her home, or at least part of her life. The main floor held a spacious kitchen where Mrs. Chen worked, a dining area with a solid oak table that could seat 8, and a front room with the massive stone fireplace and comfortable furniture that showed signs of use but also care. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms. The one Mrs. Chen had given her was clearly the master bedroom. The other 2 were smaller. One held a narrow bed and appeared to be for guests, while the third was completely empty except for bare wooden floors and dusty corners. A nursery, Eleanor realized with a jolt. That room could become a nursery. She stood in the doorway, imagining it. A cradle by the window where sunlight would stream in. A rocking chair where she could sit and nurse her baby. Soft blankets and tiny clothes hanging from pegs on the wall. A space filled with new life and possibility instead of emptiness. The image was so vivid it made her chest ache. "Miss Hayes?" Mrs. Chen's voice called from downstairs. "Supper will be ready soon if you're hungry." Eleanor joined the housekeeper in the kitchen, where a simple but hearty meal of stew and fresh bread was being prepared. They ate together at the kitchen table, Mrs. Chen asking polite questions about Eleanor's journey west, and Eleanor providing carefully edited answers that skirted around the truth of why she'd come. If Mrs. Chen suspected there was more to the story, she was too tactful to pry. After supper, Eleanor helped wash the dishes despite Mrs. Chen's protests. The domestic ritual was soothing, giving her hands something to do while her mind churned with anxiety about tomorrow. When the kitchen was clean, Mrs. Chen bid her good night and retired to her own small room off the kitchen, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. The house creaked and settled around her, unfamiliar sounds in an unfamiliar place. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, so many more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, where city lights drowned out all but the brightest. Somewhere out there, Gavin Mercer was likely lying awake too, perhaps wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake by proposing to a desperate stranger. Eleanor wouldn't blame him if he changed his mind. She wouldn't blame him at all. But morning came, and with it, the sound of a wagon pulling into the yard. Eleanor rushed to the window and saw Gavin climbing down from the seat, dressed in what was clearly his best clothing: dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, a black vest, and a string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved. He looked handsome and serious and utterly determined. He hadn't changed his mind. Eleanor's hands flew to her hair, still in the loose braid she'd slept in. She had perhaps 20 minutes to make herself presentable for her own wedding. Her second attempt at a wedding, she thought with dark humor, though this one would actually happen. She chose her best dress, a deep green wool with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. It was 2 years old and had been altered twice as fashions changed, but it was still respectable. She arranged her dark hair as well as she could without a lady's maid, pinning it up in a simple style that wouldn't draw attention to the fact that she was doing it herself. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was thinner than it had been 2 months ago, worry and sparse eating having carved away the softness of her cheeks. But her eyes held a fierce determination that was new. She was going to survive this. Whatever it took, she was going to survive. A soft knock preceded Mrs. Chen's entrance. "Mr. Mercer's waiting downstairs, miss. He brought something for you." Eleanor descended the stairs carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs. Gavin stood in the front room, holding a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers, purple asters and golden black-eyed Susans tied with a simple ribbon. "I figured a bride should have flowers," he said, a slight flush coloring his tanned cheeks, "even if it's just a practical arrangement." The gesture was so unexpectedly thoughtful that Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. They're beautiful." Gavin's gaze traveled over her, and something flickered in his expression. "You look real nice, Eleanor." "So do you." It was true. Cleaned up and formally dressed, Gavin Mercer was a striking man, tall and solid and radiating a quiet strength that was somehow reassuring. "The Reverend is expecting us at 10 o'clock, Gavin said. "Mrs. Chen, you'll come as witness?" "Of course, Mr. Mercer." The housekeeper was already reaching for her shawl. "It would be my honor." The ride into town was quiet, tension humming in the air between them. Eleanor clutched her bouquet and tried to calm her racing thoughts. This was really happening. In less than an hour, she would be married to this man beside her, this stranger who was offering her salvation. Silver Creek looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow, more like an actual place where real people lived real lives. The church stood white and simple at the end of the main street, its steeple reaching toward the brilliant blue sky. Reverend Fletcher met them at the door, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mr. Mercer explained the situation," he said quietly to Eleanor. "Miss Hayes, I want to be certain this is your choice. You're not being coerced in any way?" "No, Reverend." Eleanor's voice was steady. "This is my decision." The Reverend studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Come inside." The church interior was simple but lovely, with wooden pews polished smooth by years of use and light streaming through plain glass windows. Mrs. Fletcher was already there, sitting in the front pew, and she smiled warmly at Eleanor as they entered. "We'll need another witness," Reverend Fletcher said. "The law requires 2. As if on cue, the church door opened and a young woman hurried in, slightly out of breath. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with honey blonde hair escaping from a hastily pinned bun and bright, curious eyes that immediately fixed on Eleanor. "Sorry I'm late," she said cheerfully. "Gavin, you didn't tell me your bride was so pretty. I would have brought a proper gift instead of just showing up." Eleanor, this is my sister Maggie, Gavin said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. She lives with me and helps run the ranch. Maggie, this is Eleanor Hayes. Soon to be Eleanor Mercer. Maggie crossed the space between them and took both of Eleanor's hands in hers. Welcome to the family. I'm so glad Gavin finally found someone. He's been grumpy and lonely for far too long. Maggie, Gavin warned, but there was no real heat in it. What? It's true. Maggie squeezed Eleanor's hands. Don't worry, I'll help you get settled, and I'll teach you everything you need to know about ranch life. It's going to be wonderful having another woman around. Eleanor found herself smiling despite her nerves. Maggie's enthusiasm was infectious, and her genuine friendliness was like a balm on Eleanor's anxious heart. I think we have our witnesses, Reverend Fletcher said. Shall we proceed? They gathered before the simple altar, Eleanor and Gavin standing side by side while Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Fletcher, and Maggie arranged themselves nearby. The Reverend opened his Bible, and suddenly the moment was real and immediate and terrifying. Dearly beloved, Reverend Fletcher began, his voice carrying through the quiet church. We are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Eleanor's hands trembled around her bouquet. Gavin stood perfectly still beside her, his profile calm and composed. How could he be so steady when her entire world was spinning? Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, the Reverend continued, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Not lightly. No, there was nothing light about this. Eleanor was betting everything, her future, her child's future, her very survival, on this man's word and character. Gavin Mercer, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Gavin's voice was clear and unwavering. Eleanor Hayes, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat had closed completely, panic rising like a tide. This was forever. This was binding. Once she spoke these words, there would be no going back. Gavin's hand found hers, warm and solid. He didn't look at her, didn't pressure her, just offered that steady presence that said she wasn't alone. I do, Eleanor whispered. The ring? Reverend Fletcher prompted. Eleanor hadn't even thought about rings. Of course there would be no ring. This had all been arranged in less than 24 hours. But Gavin reached into his vest pocket and produced a simple gold band worn smooth with age. It was my mother's, he said quietly, meeting Eleanor's eyes for the first time during the ceremony. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. Eleanor's vision blurred as Gavin took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, settling into place as if it had always belonged there. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, Reverend Fletcher said solemnly, I now pronounce you man and wife. Gavin, you may kiss your bride. Gavin turned to Eleanor, and she saw a question in his eyes, a request for permission. She gave the tiniest nod, and he leaned down to press a chaste kiss to her lips, barely more than a brush of contact over in an instant, but somehow sealing the irrevocable change between them. She was married. She was Eleanor Mercer now. The life she'd known, the person she'd been, was gone forever, replaced by this new identity as the wife of a Montana rancher. Congratulations, Maggie cried out, breaking the solemn moment. She rushed forward to embrace Eleanor enthusiastically. Oh, I'm so happy. We're going to be such good friends. I just know it. Mrs. Fletcher joined in with her own congratulations, and even Mrs. Chen allowed herself a small smile. Reverend Fletcher shook Gavin's hand and gently patted Eleanor's shoulder. May God bless your union, he said, and may you find happiness together. Eleanor could only nod, still too overwhelmed to speak. After signing the marriage register, Eleanor's hand shaking so badly her signature was almost illegible, they emerged from the church into bright sunlight. A few townspeople had gathered outside, drawn by curiosity about the quick wedding, and Eleanor felt their stares like physical touches. Don't mind them, Maggie said cheerfully, linking her arm through Eleanor's. They're just surprised. Gavin's been eligible for years, and suddenly he shows up married. They'll gossip for a few days and then move on to the next interesting thing. Come back to our place for dinner, Gavin said to Mrs. Chen. You shouldn't have to cook on a day like this. Our place, Eleanor thought, not my place. Already Gavin was treating the ranch as theirs together. The ride to Gavin's ranch took them in a different direction from Henry's property, heading more directly into the mountains. The landscape was similar, rolling grassland giving way to forested foothills. But as they climbed higher, Eleanor caught her breath at the view. Gavin's ranch sat in a high valley with mountains rising dramatically on three sides. A river ran through the property, and the house itself was larger than Henry's, built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Corrals and outbuildings were arranged efficiently nearby, and cattle dotted the pastures in every direction. "Oh my," Eleanor breathed. "It's magnificent." "It's home," Gavin said simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "Built it myself over the past 12 years. Started with nothing but a land claim and a lot of stubbornness." Maggie laughed. "He's being modest. Gavin worked like a madman to build this place. Some seasons I think he barely slept." As they pulled into the yard, Eleanor noticed how well-maintained everything was. The fences were straight and sturdy, the barn doors hung true, and the house itself looked solid enough to weather any storm. This was the work of a man who took pride in what he built and maintained it properly. "Welcome home, Eleanor," Gavin said quietly, helping her down from the wagon. Home. The word settled over her with a strange mix of comfort and disorientation. This was her home now. This beautiful remote valley in the Montana mountains was where she would raise her child, where she would build whatever life she could with this man she'd married. The interior of the house was spacious and clean, if Spartan in its furnishings. The main room held a large stone fireplace similar to the one in Henry's house, comfortable if worn furniture, and shelves lined with books, more books than Eleanor would have expected from a rancher. "You read," she said, surprised. "Is that a problem?" Gavin's tone was wry. "No, not at all. Eleanor felt herself flush. "I didn't expect it." "My mother was a school teacher back in Illinois," Gavin explained. "She made sure I got a proper education before she passed. Reading's one of the few entertainments I have in the winter when the work slows down." Maggie bustled around, pulling food from the cold box and starting preparations for dinner. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind sharing the main bedroom with Gavin. I've got the smaller room upstairs, and we converted the third bedroom into an office for ranch business. But I can move things around if you need—" "Maggie," Gavin interrupted gently. "Eleanor and I need to talk privately for a moment. Why don't you get Mrs. Chen settled with some tea?" Maggie's eyes went wide with understanding. Oh, of course. Come on, Mrs. Chen, let me show you the garden. It's my pride and joy." When they were alone, Gavin gestured for Eleanor to sit in one of the worn armchairs near the fireplace. He remained standing, looking suddenly awkward in a way he hadn't before. "I should have discussed the sleeping arrangements before we married," he said. "That was thoughtless of me." Eleanor's heart began to race. This was it, the conversation about what their marriage would actually mean, what he would expect from her. "I know we married for practical reasons," Gavin continued, his gaze fixed on the cold fireplace rather than on her. "And I meant what I said about not expecting romantic feelings. But people will talk if a newly married couple has separate bedrooms. It would raise questions." "I understand," Eleanor said quietly. "So I'm suggesting we share the room, but I'll sleep on the floor. I've got a good bedroll, and I've slept in worse places. Once some time has passed and people have stopped paying such close attention, we can make other arrangements if you prefer." Eleanor studied his profile, the strong jaw, the honest blue eyes, the way he held himself with such careful consideration for her comfort despite the awkwardness of the situation. Something loosened in her chest. "Gavin, you don't have to sleep on the floor in your own house. The bed is large enough for both of us, as long as—" She swallowed hard. "As long as you understand that I'm not ready for certain aspects of marriage." "I understand completely." His eyes finally met hers, and there was nothing but respect in them. "Eleanor, I will never force you into anything you're not willing to give. You have my word on that." She believed him. Against all odds, despite knowing him for barely a day, She believed him. Then we'll share the room, she said, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. Gavin's shoulders visibly relaxed. All right then. I'll bring your things up from the wagon. Dinner was a surprisingly cheerful affair. Maggie kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Eleanor questions about Philadelphia and telling stories about ranch life that made even Mrs. Chen smile. Gavin remained mostly quiet, but Eleanor caught him watching her several times with an expression she couldn't quite read. After Mrs. Chen left to return to Henry's ranch, and after the dishes were washed and put away, Maggie announced she was exhausted and headed upstairs to bed. That left Eleanor and Gavin alone in the main room. The silence between them suddenly weighted with significance. I should probably turn in too, Eleanor said, standing. It's been a long day. Eleanor, wait. Gavin stood as well, reaching into his pocket. There's something I need to tell you before we go upstairs together. Her stomach dropped. Here it was. The catch she'd been waiting for, the hidden truth that would reveal this had all been too good to be true. I know why you agreed to marry me, Gavin said quietly. And I know about your situation, but there's something you don't know about mine. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. I can't have children, Eleanor. I was kicked by a horse about 8 years ago, and the damage, well, the doctor said it was unlikely I'd ever father a child. Eleanor stared at him, processing this confession. But then why would I marry a pregnant woman? A sad smile crossed his face. Because it means I get something I thought I'd never have, a family. Your baby will be mine in every way that matters. I'll raise that child as my own, love them as my own, and no one will ever be able to question whether they're truly mine, because everyone knows. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Because everyone knows you can't have children, Eleanor finished softly. No one here knows that except Maggie, and now you, Gavin corrected. But it means that when your baby comes, there won't be any questions about timing or paternity. As far as anyone's concerned, we married quickly because we fell in love, and the baby came early. People will whisper, but they won't know for sure. Eleanor sank back into the chair, overwhelmed by this revelation. Gavin hadn't just offered her a marriage of convenience. He'd offered her a complete solution to her impossible situation. Her child would never be questioned, never be called illegitimate, never suffer for Eleanor's mistakes. You planned all this, she whispered. From the moment you realized I was pregnant, you were planning how to make it work. I thought about it, yes. Gavin crouched down beside her chair. Eleanor, I'm not asking you to love me or even to like me, but I am asking you to trust me. I will keep you safe. I will provide for you and your child, and I will never ever throw your past in your face or use it against you. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, not tears of sadness this time, but of overwhelming relief. For the first time since she'd realized she was pregnant, since Daniel had abandoned her and her family had turned their backs, she felt the crushing weight of fear lift just slightly. Thank you, she managed to choke out. Gavin, I don't know how I'll ever repay you for... You don't have to repay me. He handed her his handkerchief. We're helping each other. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Partnership. Eleanor wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. When she could speak again, her voice was steadier. I promise I'll be a good wife to you. I'll work hard. I'll help with the ranch however I can. I won't let you regret this. I don't think I will, Gavin said softly. Then he stood and offered her his hand. Come on, let's get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Maggie will probably want to show you everything about the ranch, and I need to check on the north pasture. Eleanor took his hand and let him help her up. Together, they climbed the stairs to the room that was now theirs, to the bed they would share, to the life they would build, to the uncertain future they'd chosen together. The bedroom was large and surprisingly comfortable, with a big bed covered in a simple quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. Gavin had already brought up Eleanor's bag, setting it carefully on a chair. I'll, step outside while you change, he said, his ears turning slightly red. Just let me know when you're ready. After he left, Eleanor changed quickly into her nightgown, her hands trembling slightly. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, then called out that she was decent. Gavin came back in, now wearing a simple nightshirt. He moved to the other side of the bed, his movements careful and deliberate, clearly trying not to make her uncomfortable. When he slid under the covers, he stayed close to his edge of the mattress, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Good night, Eleanor," he said quietly, turning away from her to face the wall. "Good night, Gavin." Eleanor lay in the darkness, listening to her new husband's breathing gradually slow into sleep. She placed her hand over her belly, feeling the faint flutter of the baby's movement. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to the child growing inside her. "We're going to have a home, a real home." And for the first time in months, Eleanor Mercer, allowed herself to believe it might actually be true. Eleanor woke to unfamiliar sounds, the lowing of cattle in the distance, a rooster crowing, and closer, the creak of floorboards as someone moved around downstairs. Pale dawn light filtered through the curtains, and for a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. Montana, the wedding, Gavin. She turned her head and found the other side of the bed empty, the covers already pulled neat. Her husband, the words still felt strange, had risen without waking her. Eleanor sat up slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby was quiet this morning, not yet stirring with the day. The bedroom door opened a crack, and Maggie's blonde head poked through. "Oh, good. You're awake. I was going to let you sleep longer, but breakfast is almost ready, and Gavin wanted to know if you felt well enough to come down, or if I should bring you a tray." "I'll come down," Eleanor said quickly. She didn't want to start her first full day here by being waited on, like an invalid. "Just give me a moment to dress." "Take your time." Maggie's cheerfulness was almost overwhelming at this early hour. "There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I set out some soap that smells like lavender. Gavin bought it in town last month but never used it. I think he was planning ahead even then." After Maggie left, Eleanor washed and dressed in her simpler gray wool dress, the one more suited to work than social calls. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. Her face was still pale from yesterday's emotional upheaval, but there was something different in her eyes. Not quite hope yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the smell of coffee, bacon, and fresh biscuits. Maggie stood at the stove, expertly managing multiple pans while humming to herself. Gavin sat at the large wooden table, already dressed for work in worn denim and a chambray shirt, his hat hanging on a peg by the door. He looked up when Eleanor entered, and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. "Morning. Did you sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." Eleanor slid into the chair across from him, acutely aware of how domestic this all felt. A married couple having breakfast together, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Coffee?" Maggie appeared at her elbow with a pot. "Or would you prefer tea? We have both." "Tea, please, if it's not too much trouble." Coffee had been turning Eleanor's stomach lately, one of the many small changes pregnancy had brought. "No trouble at all." Maggie poured steaming tea into a cup and set it before Eleanor along with a small pitcher of cream. "How do you like your eggs?" "However they come is fine. I don't want to be any bother." "You're not a bother. You're family." Maggie said it so matter-of-factly that Eleanor's throat tightened. "Besides, it's nice having another woman here. I've been outnumbered for years." Gavin cleared his throat. "Eleanor, I need to ride out to check on the herd this morning. Normally I'd be gone most of the day, but if you need me here, no, please, don't change your routine on my account." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm teacup. "I should learn how things work here anyway." "I'll show her around," Maggie announced, setting plates of food in front of them. "The chickens need feeding, and I wanted to work in the garden. Eleanor can help if she feels up to it." They ate together, Maggie keeping up a steady stream of conversation about the ranch, the neighbors, and the town. Eleanor learned that the nearest other ranch belonged to a family called the Hendersons, who had 3 sons and were perfectly nice but terribly dull. Beyond that, the closest neighbors were several miles away in various directions. "It can get lonely in winter," Maggie admitted. "The snows come heavy, and sometimes we don't see anyone but each other for weeks. But there are dances in town once a month, and church on Sundays, and we always manage to have a good Christmas despite everything." Gavin ate quietly, occasionally glancing at Eleanor as if checking that she was all right. When he finished, he stood and reached for his hat. "I'll be back before dark," he said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, He crossed to Eleanor's chair and bent to kiss the top of her head, a gesture so casual and yet so intimate that it made her breath catch. "Take it easy today. Don't let Maggie work you too hard." "I heard that," Maggie called from the stove. "You were meant to." There was a smile in Gavin's voice. Then he was gone, his boots thudding across the porch and down the steps. Through the window, Eleanor watched him stride toward the barn, his movements economical and purposeful. A few minutes later, he rode out on a large bay gelding, a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle and a coiled rope at his hip. He looked completely at home in this landscape, as much a part of it as the mountains themselves. "He's a good man," Maggie said softly, coming to stand beside Eleanor at the window. "I know this all happened fast, and I know it's probably overwhelming, but my brother, he'll take care of you. That's just who he is." Eleanor turned to face her new sister-in-law. "Maggie, can I ask you something? Why doesn't Gavin have a wife already? He's successful, he's handsome, he seems kind. Why has he been alone all this time?" Maggie's expression grew thoughtful. She poured herself more coffee and sat down at the table, gesturing for Eleanor to join her. "It's not a short story." "I'd like to hear it." Eleanor needed to understand the man she'd married, needed to know what had shaped him into someone who would offer marriage to a desperate stranger. "All right." Maggie wrapped her hands around her cup. Gavin was engaged once, about 10 years ago. Her name was Catherine, and she was the daughter of a wealthy rancher from the next county over. Beautiful, educated, everything Gavin thought he wanted. They courted for a year, and everyone said they were perfect together. Eleanor felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been jealousy. What happened? She left him at the altar. Literally. Maggie's voice was flat. The day of the wedding, with the church full of guests, Catherine's father announced that she'd run off with a traveling salesman the night before, left a note saying she couldn't bear the thought of being a rancher's wife, that this life was too hard and too lonely, and she wanted more than Montana could offer. Oh no. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. That's terrible. Gavin was devastated, not just heartbroken, but humiliated. The whole territory heard about it. For months afterward, people whispered whenever he came to town. Maggie's jaw tightened. He threw himself into work after that. Built up this ranch from decent to one of the best in the region. Barely slept, barely ate, just worked himself to exhaustion every single day. I was worried he'd work himself to death. And he never courted anyone else? He tried, once or twice, but I think after Catherine, he couldn't trust his own judgment anymore. Couldn't believe that someone wouldn't eventually leave him for an easier life. Maggie met Eleanor's eyes directly. That's why your situation made sense to him. You need him as much as he needs you. There's honesty in that. No false promises or romantic illusions that might shatter. Eleanor absorbed this information, understanding Gavin a little better now. He'd chosen practical partnership over romantic love because love had betrayed him before. In its own way, it was as sad as her own story. I won't leave him, Eleanor said quietly. I promise you that. Whatever else happens between us, I won't abandon him. Maggie's face lit up with a smile. I'm glad. Now come on, let me show you around. Those chickens won't feed themselves. The morning passed in a blur of new experiences. Eleanor learned where the chickens roosted, how to scatter feed so the more aggressive hens didn't hog it all, and how to collect eggs without getting pecked. She helped Maggie pull the last vegetables from the garden before the hard frosts came, squash and pumpkins and hardy root vegetables that would keep them fed through the winter. The work was physical, in a way Eleanor's Philadelphia life had never been. By mid-morning, her back ached and her hands were dirty, but there was something satisfying about it. She was contributing. She was useful. These weren't the useless accomplishments of a society lady, embroidery and watercolors and speaking passable French. These were skills that actually mattered for survival. You're doing great, Maggie said encouragingly as they hauled baskets of vegetables toward the root cellar. Most city girls I've met can't handle ranch work at all. They complain about getting dirty or breaking their nails. I don't have the luxury of complaining, Eleanor said it without self-pity, just stating a fact. I need to learn how to be useful here. Maggie studied her with newfound respect. You're going to fit in just fine, I think. They broke for lunch. leftover biscuits with butter and jam, and cold chicken from last night's dinner. Eleanor was hungrier than she'd been in weeks, and she ate with genuine appetite while Maggie chatted about the upcoming harvest dance and which families would be there. "You and Gavin should come," Maggie said. "Everyone will want to meet his new wife anyway. Might as well get it over with all at once instead of enduring months of surprise visits." The thought of facing a room full of curious strangers made Eleanor's stomach knot, but Maggie was probably right. "When is it?" "2 weeks from Saturday. That gives you some time to settle in and get your bearings." Maggie grinned. "Plus, Gavin cleans up real nice for dances. You should see him in his Sunday best." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. She'd been trying very hard not to notice how attractive her husband was, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The way he moved, the quiet strength in his hands, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face, all of it was dangerously appealing. "Come on," Maggie said, standing. "Let me show you the barn. You should meet the horses properly, and I want you to see the new foals Gavin's been raising. They're absolutely darling." The barn was huge and meticulously organized, with stalls for a dozen horses and a large open area for hay storage. Several horses poked their heads over stall doors as the women entered, whickering curiously. "This is Rosie," Maggie said, stopping to stroke the nose of a gentle-looking mare. "She's mine, sweet as pie and smart as a whip. And this big fellow is Thunder. He's Gavin's usual mount, but he's resting today, so Gavin took Ranger instead." Eleanor tentatively reached out to pat Rosie's soft nose. The mare's dark eyes were kind, and she nuzzled Eleanor's palm as if looking for treats. "She likes you." Maggie pulled a carrot from her pocket and handed it to Eleanor. "Here, give her this. Keep your palm flat so she doesn't accidentally get your fingers." Eleanor offered the carrot, delighting in the feel of the mare's soft lips against her hand. "I've never been around horses much. In Philadelphia, we took carriages but didn't own horses." "Well, you'll be around them plenty here. Can you ride?" "A little. I had a few lessons when I was younger, but I'm not very good." "I'll teach you." Maggie said it with such confidence that Eleanor almost believed it would be easy. Every ranch wife needs to know how to ride. Sometimes it's the fastest way to get somewhere, and in emergencies, it might save your life. They moved deeper into the barn, where 3 leggy foals occupied a large stall with their mothers. The babies were all gangly legs and curious noses, and when Maggie climbed into the stall, they crowded around her eagerly. "Aren't they precious?" Maggie cooed, scratching behind their ears. "Gavin's been breeding horses for the past few years. He's got a good eye for it. These foals will sell for top dollar once they're trained." Eleanor watched from outside the stall, enchanted by the baby's antics. One of them, a dark bay with a white star on its forehead, kept trying to chew on Maggie's sleeve while another attempted to investigate her pockets for treats. "Would you like to come in?" Maggie offered. "They're gentle." Eleanor hesitated. "Is it safe for someone who's—" She trailed off, not sure how much Gavin had told his sister. Maggie's expression softened with understanding. "Gavin told me you're expecting. Congratulations, by the way, and yes, it's safe as long as you're careful. Just stay calm and move slow. Horses can sense nervousness." Eleanor climbed carefully into the stall, and immediately the curious foals converged on her, sniffing and nudging with soft noses. She laughed despite herself, running her hands over their fuzzy coats. "When is the baby due?" Maggie asked quietly. "Early spring, I think. Late March or early April." Eleanor kept her eyes on the foals. "I haven't seen a doctor yet. We'll take you to Doc Morrison in town next week. He delivered half the babies in the county, including me." Maggie's voice was warm, without judgment. "He's discreet too, if that's a concern." Eleanor met her eyes. "You know, don't you, about why Gavin and I married so quickly?" "I can guess," Maggie shrugged. "But it doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you're here now and your family. The rest is nobody's business but yours and Gavin's." The acceptance in those words made Eleanor's eyes sting with tears. She'd expected judgment, condemnation, or at best cold tolerance. Instead, Maggie was offering genuine friendship. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "You don't know how much that means." "I think I do." Maggie reached out and squeezed her hand. "Come on, let's get back to the house. I need to start dinner, and you should probably rest for a bit. You've done more than enough work for your first day." That afternoon, while Maggie prepared a venison stew for dinner, Eleanor sat in the front room with a basket of mending Maggie had given her. The simple domestic task was soothing, giving her hands something to do while her mind wandered. She thought about Gavin, out somewhere on the vast ranch, checking on cattle and fixing fences and doing whatever other mysterious tasks kept a ranch running. She thought about the baby growing inside her, who would be born into this life of mountains and hard work and wide open spaces. She thought about Daniel Whitmore, her former life in Philadelphia, and how impossibly far away it all seemed now. This was her reality. This house, this family, this strange new existence as a rancher's wife. Eleanor could either spend her energy mourning what she'd lost, or she could embrace what she'd gained. The choice seemed obvious when framed that way. She was still sewing when the sound of hoofbeats announced Gavin's return. Through the window, she watched him dismount and lead his horse into the barn. Even from a distance, she could see the weariness in his movements. He'd been working hard all day. 10 minutes later, he came into the house, his face lined with fatigue but his eyes seeking her out immediately. "How was your day?" "Educational," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Maggie taught me about chickens and gardens and horses." "She didn't work you too hard?" Concern flickered across his face. "I'm fine. Actually, it felt good to be useful." Gavin's expression softened. "You're more than useful, Eleanor. He seemed to struggle for words. "It's good having you here. The house feels different already." Before Eleanor could respond, Maggie called from the kitchen that dinner was ready. They ate together at the big table, and Eleanor noticed how naturally the three of them fell into conversation. Gavin asking about Maggie's day, Maggie teasing him about coming home with hay in his hair, Eleanor contributing her own observations about the ranch. It felt almost like a real family. After dinner, Gavin excused himself to check on the horses one final time before dark, leaving Eleanor and Maggie to clean up. They worked side by side in companionable silence until Maggie suddenly spoke. "Eleanor, can I ask you something personal?" Eleanor's hand stilled in the dishwater. "Of course." "Are you afraid?" "Of the baby coming, I mean, and of how things will be after." Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Yes, I'm terrified, honestly. I've never even held a newborn baby before. What if I don't know what to do? What if something goes wrong?" "You'll learn," Maggie said firmly, "and you won't be alone. I'll help, and so will Gavin. He's better with babies than you'd think. He helped deliver 3 foals last spring and was gentle as could be." She paused. "And Eleanor? I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I've seen the way Gavin looks at you, like he can't quite believe you're real. Give it time. I think this could become something more than either of you planned." Eleanor's heart skipped. "He's just being kind." "My brother doesn't do anything just to be kind. He's protective and loyal, but he doesn't invest himself unless he truly cares." Maggie dried her hands and turned to face Eleanor directly. "I'm not saying you have to love him back. I'm just saying don't be surprised if this arrangement becomes more complicated than you expected." That night, Eleanor lay in the big bed next to Gavin, listening to his even breathing in the darkness. She thought about what Maggie had said, about complicated feelings and unexpected possibilities. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "Gavin?" she whispered, not sure if he was awake. His voice was drowsy but alert. "Thank you for everything, for giving us a home." There was a long pause. Then she felt the bed shift slightly as he turned toward her, though he still maintained a respectful distance. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. You're giving me something too, a chance at the family I thought I'd never have. So the thanks go both ways." Eleanor rolled toward him in the darkness, and though she couldn't see his face clearly, she could feel his presence, solid and steady and real. "I'm going to try to be a good wife to you," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be a ranch wife yet, but I'll learn. I'll work hard. Hey." His hand found hers under the covers, his fingers warm as they laced through hers. "You don't have to prove anything. Just be yourself. That's enough." Something cracked open in Eleanor's chest, some hard shell of fear and self-protection that had been holding her together since Daniel abandoned her. Tears leaked from her eyes onto the pillow. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed. I'm not the girl I was in Philadelphia, but I don't know how to be this person either. Then we'll figure it out together. Gavin's thumb stroked across her knuckles. You've got time, Eleanor. We both do. She fell asleep still holding his hand, and in her dreams she was walking through golden fields with a dark-haired child running ahead of her, laughing. The days began to develop a rhythm. Eleanor woke each morning to find Gavin already up and working, shared breakfast with him and Maggie, then spent her days learning the countless skills required to keep a ranch household running. She learned to churn butter, to preserve vegetables, to mend work clothes that seemed to tear with alarming frequency. She learned which chickens were reliable layers and which were getting too old. She learned to tell the difference between a calf in distress and one just calling for its mother. And slowly, so gradually, she almost didn't notice, she began to learn Gavin. She learned that he was unfailingly patient when teaching her something new, never making her feel stupid for not knowing how to do things she'd simply never encountered before. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. She learned that he read poetry in the evening sometimes, though he seemed embarrassed when she discovered his worn copy of Whitman tucked beside his chair. She learned that he was gentle with creatures weaker than himself, horses, cattle, the barn cat who'd had kittens in the hayloft. And she learned that beneath his quiet, reserved exterior was a man who felt things deeply, though he rarely showed it. A week after their marriage, Gavin took Eleanor into town to see Doc Morrison. The older physician examined her thoroughly but kindly, confirming what she already knew. She was healthy, the baby seemed to be developing well, and barring any complications, she should deliver sometime in early April. You're further along than some women would want folks knowing so soon after marriage, Doc Morrison said with a knowing look, but that's between you and God as far as I'm concerned. What matters is that you're taking care of yourself. On the ride home, Gavin was quiet until they were nearly back to the ranch. Then he spoke abruptly. The baby moved this morning, didn't it, when you put your hand on your belly at breakfast? Eleanor was surprised he'd noticed. Yes, the movements are getting stronger. Gavin was silent for a long moment. Then, almost shyly, he asked, What does it feel like? Like butterflies at first. Now it's more like little taps from the inside. Sometimes it's startling. She smiled despite herself. Sometimes I think the baby must be dancing in there. Must be something, carrying a life inside you like that. Eleanor heard the wistfulness in his voice and remembered what he'd told her on their wedding night, that he couldn't have children of his own. This baby would be the closest he'd ever come to fatherhood. Acting on impulse, Eleanor reached for his free hand and placed it gently on the side of her belly where she had last felt movement. Here, maybe if you wait a moment. They sat there in the stopped wagon, Gavin's large, work-roughened hand spread across her belly, both of them barely breathing. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, there, a distinct flutter kick against his palm. Gavin's entire face transformed. His eyes went wide, his mouth fell open slightly, and when he looked at Eleanor, there was wonder written across every feature. That's... His voice came out hoarse. That's amazing. That's a person, a whole person, right there. Your son or daughter, Eleanor said softly. Our child. Something passed between them in that moment, something profound that shifted the ground beneath Eleanor's feet. This wasn't just a practical arrangement anymore. This wasn't just two strangers helping each other survive. This was becoming something real. Gavin's hand lingered on her belly for another moment before he carefully withdrew it, as if afraid he might hurt her or the baby. When he took up the reins again, his hands weren't quite steady. They didn't speak for the rest of the ride home, but the silence felt different now, charged with possibility and the beginning of something neither of them had quite bargained for. That night, lying in bed with Gavin's sleeping form beside her, Eleanor allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if Maggie was right? What if this marriage could become something more than convenience? What if she could actually be happy here? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Eleanor placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's movements beneath her palms. Your father is a good man, she whispered to the child. Better than I deserve, maybe. But I'm going to try to deserve him. I promise you that. The baby kicked in response, and Eleanor smiled in the darkness, allowing herself, just for this moment, to hope. The weeks that followed carried a peculiar blend of routine and revelation. Eleanor found herself settling into ranch life with an ease that surprised her, though the physical demands often left her exhausted by evening. Her body was changing daily now, her belly rounding noticeably despite her attempts to conceal it beneath loose aprons and carefully draped shawls. Soon there would be no hiding her condition from anyone. The thought of facing the town, of enduring the whispers and calculating stares, filled her with dread. But Maggie remained insistent about attending the harvest dance, and Gavin, though he said little, seemed to agree that getting the inevitable scrutiny over with would be better than prolonging it. On the Saturday morning of the dance, Eleanor woke to find the first snow of the season dusting the mountains. The valley itself remained clear, but the white peaks in the distance served as a stark reminder that winter was coming, and with it, the isolation Maggie had warned her about. "Perfect weather for a dance," Maggie announced at breakfast, her eyes bright with excitement. "Cold enough that the hall won't get stifling, but not so cold that the roads are dangerous." "You're going to love it, Eleanor. The whole community comes together. There's music and dancing and the best food you've ever tasted. Everyone brings something." "What should we bring?" Eleanor asked, trying to match Maggie's enthusiasm despite her nervousness. "I was thinking apple pies. We've got plenty from the trees out back, and you make the best crust I've ever seen." Maggie had been teaching Eleanor to bake, and Eleanor had discovered she had a knack for pastry. "3 pies should do it. That'll feed plenty of folks and make a good impression." Gavin looked up from his coffee, his gaze settling on Eleanor with an expression she was learning to read, concern mixed with protectiveness. "You don't have to go if you're not feeling up to it. No one would fault you for staying home." "I'm fine," Eleanor said, though her stomach was churning with anxiety that had nothing to do with the baby. "Maggie's right. Better to face everyone at once." "All right then." Gavin stood, reaching for his hat. "I'll finish the morning chores early so we can leave by 3. The dance starts at 5, but folks will want to socialize first." He paused at the door, looking back at Eleanor. "You look real pretty this morning, by the way. That blue brings out your eyes." He was gone before Eleanor could respond, leaving her blushing at the unexpected compliment. Across the table, Maggie grinned knowingly. "Told you," she said. "Complicated." They spent the morning baking, filling the kitchen with the sweet smell of cinnamon and apples. Eleanor found the work soothing, letting her mind focus on measuring and rolling instead of worrying about the evening ahead. By noon, 3 perfect pies sat cooling on the sideboard, their crusts golden and flaky. "Now comes the fun part," Maggie announced. "Getting dressed up. Come on, let's see what you've got to wear." In Eleanor's room, they surveyed her limited wardrobe. Eleanor had exactly one dress that might be suitable for a social occasion, a deep burgundy wool with black trim that she'd worn to dinner parties in Philadelphia. It was elegant but modest, with long sleeves and a high neckline that would be appropriate for a Montana ranch dance. "Perfect," Maggie declared. "That color is gorgeous on you, and it's loose enough in the waist that nobody will notice anything yet." Eleanor ran her hands over the fabric, remembering the last time she'd worn this dress. It had been at the Whitmore family dinner where Daniel's father had made it clear that Eleanor was no longer welcome in their home, that any claims she made against his son would be vigorously denied and legally contested. She'd been wearing this dress when her entire world had collapsed. "Hey," Maggie touched her arm gently. "Where did you just go?" "Nowhere good," Eleanor forced a smile. "Just memories. Bad ones." "Then let's make new memories. Better ones." Maggie squeezed her hand. "Come on, help me with my hair, and then I'll do yours. We're going to look so beautiful that every woman there will be jealous, and every man will wonder how they got so lucky." Despite her anxiety, Eleanor found herself laughing. Maggie's irrepressible optimism was infectious, making it impossible to stay mired in dark thoughts for long. They spent the afternoon preparing, helping each other with their hair and dresses. Maggie wore a golden yellow that brought out the honey tones in her blonde hair, and she'd styled it in an elaborate updo that must have taken a dozen pins to secure. Eleanor's dark hair she left mostly down, pulling just the sides back with tortoiseshell combs that had belonged to her mother. When Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her cheeks had more color now than they'd had in months, no longer pale and hollow. Her eyes, though still cautious, held a spark that had been missing since Daniel's betrayal. She looked like someone who belonged in this life, strong and capable, and ready to face whatever came. A knock on the door announced Gavin's presence. "Ladies, the wagon's ready whenever you are." Eleanor opened the door and found her husband transformed. He wore dark trousers with a pressed white shirt, a brocade vest in deep blue, and a black jacket that emphasized his broad shoulders. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved, and he'd even polished his boots to a shine. He looked devastatingly handsome, and from the way his eyes widened when he saw Eleanor, he was thinking something similar about her. "You look—" Gavin seemed to struggle for words. "You look beautiful, Eleanor." "So do you." The words came out before Eleanor could stop them, and she felt her cheeks flush. "I mean, you look very nice, very presentable." A smile tugged at the corner of Gavin's mouth. "Presentable. I'll take it." He offered her his arm. "Shall we?" The ride into town was filled with Maggie's chatter about who would be at the dance and what gossip she hoped to hear. Gavin drove in his usual competent silence, though Eleanor noticed him glancing at her frequently, as if checking that she was all right. As they crested the final hill before Silver Creek, Eleanor could see that the entire town seemed to be converging on the community hall, a large wooden building at the center of town. Wagons and horses filled the area around it, and people streamed inside carrying covered dishes and instruments. "Looks like a good turnout," Gavin observed. "Whole county must be here." Eleanor's throat tightened. That meant more people to stare at her, more whispered speculation about the hasty marriage and what might have prompted it. She forced herself to breathe slowly, reminding herself that she had every right to be here, that she'd done nothing wrong by accepting Gavin's proposal. Gavin seemed to sense her tension. As he helped her down from the wagon, he leaned close and murmured, "Stay by my side. Anyone who wants to gossip about you will have to answer to me first." The fierce protectiveness in his voice steadied Eleanor. She wasn't alone. She had a husband who would stand with her no matter what. Inside, the hall had been transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over tables laden with food. A small stage at one end held a fiddle player, a guitarist, and a man with an accordion already tuning their instruments. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter, and the smell of dozens of different dishes mingled together. The moment they entered, conversations faltered, heads turned. Eleanor felt the weight of dozens of curious eyes assessing her, judging her, speculating about her. She wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but here under this scrutiny. Then Gavin's hand found the small of her back, steady and warm, and Eleanor lifted her chin. She was Mrs. Gavin Mercer. She belonged here just as much as anyone else. "Gavin, you actually came!" A broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard pushed through the crowd, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "And you brought your bride. We've all been curious as hens to meet her. Eleanor, this is Frank Henderson. He runs the ranch northeast of ours." Gavin's introduction was smooth. "Frank, my wife. Eleanor." "Mrs. Mercer, it's a pleasure." Frank's handshake was firm but friendly. "Welcome to Silver Creek. We're glad to have you in the community." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." Eleanor managed to smile. "I'm pleased to be here. Call me Frank. Everyone does. And let me introduce you to my wife, Martha." He gestured to a plump, kind-faced woman approaching with a covered dish. "Martha, come meet the new Mrs. Mercer." Martha Henderson's eyes were sharp as they swept over Eleanor, taking in every detail, but her smile seemed genuine. "Well now, aren't you a pretty thing? An Eastern, from your accent." "Philadelphia?" "Yes, ma'am." "Long way from home. What brought you all the way out here?" The question was casual, but Eleanor heard the real inquiry beneath it. "I was seeking a fresh start," Eleanor said carefully. "Montana seemed like the right place for it." "And she found me," Gavin added, his arm sliding around Eleanor's waist in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Lucky for both of us." Martha's gaze sharpened, clearly catching the subtext, but she merely smiled. "Well, luck or fate, you've landed yourself a good man. Gavin Mercer's got more integrity in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies." Other introductions followed in a blur. The Peterson family with their 6 children, the elderly widow Mrs. Carmichael who ran the boarding house, the school teacher Miss Abernathy, Doc Morrison and his wife. Most were friendly, though Eleanor could feel the curiosity simmering beneath their polite questions. How had she and Gavin met? How long had they known each other? Wasn't it all rather sudden? Gavin fielded the questions with a practiced ease Eleanor hadn't expected, explaining that they'd corresponded after Eleanor responded to an advertisement, that sometimes you just knew when something was right, that there was no point in long engagements when two people were certain. He made it sound so natural, so reasonable, that Eleanor almost believed it herself. When the music finally started, Eleanor felt relief wash over her. At least while people were dancing, they couldn't interrogate her. Gavin led her to a chair against the wall, made sure she had a glass of punch, then excused himself to speak with some of the other ranchers about cattle prices. Eleanor watched the dancers spin across the floor, remembering the elegant balls she'd attended in Philadelphia. This was different, rougher, more energetic, with none of the rigid formality of Eastern society. But there was a joy in it that those stiff affairs had often lacked. People were dancing because they wanted to, not because social obligation demanded it. You must be Eleanor. An older woman settled into the chair beside her, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints didn't work as well as they once had. Her steel gray hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes were shrewd. I'm Judith Winters. I've lived in this territory for 40 years, and I make it my business to know everyone. How do you do, Mrs. Winters? Eleanor braced herself for another round of veiled questions. Oh, I'm too old for formalities. Call me Judith. The woman's gaze was penetrating. I'll be direct, child, because I think you'd prefer it. You're pregnant, aren't you? Eleanor's breath caught. She'd expected speculation, but not such blunt acknowledgement. That is, don't bother denying it. I've birthed 7 children and helped deliver dozens more. I know the signs. Judith's voice was matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. Question is, does Gavin know? Yes. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed. He knows everything. He married me anyway. Judith studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. I was worried that boy might be getting taken advantage of. He's got too kind a heart for his own good sometimes. But if he went into this with his eyes open, then it's nobody's business but yours. She patted Eleanor's hand with surprising gentleness. You'll get talk, of course. Small towns always talk, but it'll blow over once the next scandal comes along. Just hold your head high and don't let them see you flinch. Why are you telling me this? Eleanor asked quietly. Why help me? Because I like Gavin, and I can see he cares for you. And because I was 18 and pregnant by a married man when I came west, though I doubt anyone in this room besides my husband knows that. Judith's eyes held understanding born of experience. We all have our stories, child. Some of us are just better at hiding them. Welcome to Montana. It's not an easy life, but it's an honest one. Before Eleanor could respond, Judith stood and moved away, disappearing into the crowd as abruptly as she'd appeared. Everything all right? Gavin materialized beside Eleanor, his brow furrowed with concern. Yes. Actually, I think it is. Eleanor looked up at her husband, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. This strong, quiet man who'd offered her sanctuary without judgment, who'd stood beside her through her first terrifying exposure to his community, who was looking at her now as if she were something precious that needed protecting. Gavin, would you dance with me? Surprise flickered across his face. I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I, but everyone's watching anyway, so we might as well give them something to look at. Eleanor stood and offered him her hand. Please? A slow smile spread across Gavin's face, transforming him from handsome to heartbreaking. How can I refuse my own wife? He led her onto the floor just as the band struck up a waltz. Gavin's hand settled on her waist, careful of her condition, while his other hand engulfed hers. They began to move, and Eleanor discovered he'd been lying. He was actually quite a good dancer, leading her confidently through the steps. You're full of surprises, Mr. Mercer, she said, looking up at him. So are you, Mrs. Mercer. His blue eyes held hers, intense and searching. You're braver than you give yourself credit for. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite it. Gavin's hand tightened slightly on her waist. You left everything you knew to come west. You married a stranger to protect your child. You walked into this room knowing everyone would judge you. That's bravery. Eleanor's eyes stung with unexpected tears. Why are you so kind to me? What did I ever do to deserve it? You don't have to deserve kindness, Eleanor. It should just be given. He spun her gently through a turn. Besides, you're giving me something too, remember? A family. A purpose beyond just work. You've made my house feel like a home again. The music swelled around them, and for a moment, Eleanor let herself simply feel the strength of Gavin's arms, the warmth of his body close to hers, the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the room. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. Oh no, she thought. This was becoming dangerous. She was starting to care for him, really care, in ways that went far beyond gratitude or convenience. She was starting to feel things that could get her hurt all over again. But looking into Gavin's eyes, seeing the tenderness there, Eleanor couldn't quite bring herself to pull back. Maybe, just maybe, this was worth the risk. The dance ended, and Gavin led her back to her chair. Maggie appeared moments later, flushed and laughing from her own turn on the floor. Having fun? She asked, plopping down beside Eleanor. More than I expected, Eleanor admitted. The evening progressed with more dancing, more food, and slowly, more acceptance. People still stared, still whispered, but several women approached Eleanor to welcome her properly, to invite her to quilting circles and church socials. The men shook Gavin's hand and told him he'd done well for himself. By the time they loaded back into the wagon near midnight, Eleanor was exhausted but oddly hopeful. The ride home was quiet, Maggie dozing against Eleanor's shoulder while Gavin drove through the moonlit darkness. When they reached the ranch, he helped both women down and saw Maggie safely inside before turning back to Eleanor. Thank you, she said softly, for everything tonight, for standing by me. Always, Gavin replied. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Eleanor, I need you to know something. This marriage might have started as an arrangement, but it's becoming something more, at least for me. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Gavin, I'm not asking you to feel the same, he continued. I'm just telling you where I stand. I care about you, more each day. And when that baby comes, I'm going to love that child as mine, because they will be mine in every way that matters. Eleanor couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, letting her lips linger against his skin for just a moment. Let's go inside, she whispered. It's cold out here. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Eleanor allowed her hand to find his beneath the covers. Gavin's fingers intertwined with hers immediately, and they fell asleep that way, connected, committed, and beginning to hope for something neither of them had dared to imagine before. The weeks rushed past in a blur of preparation. Winter was coming in earnest now, with snow falling more frequently and temperatures dropping steadily. Gavin worked long hours getting the ranch ready, repairing buildings, moving cattle to winter pastures, stockpiling hay and firewood. Eleanor helped where she could, though her growing belly made some tasks increasingly difficult. She was 6 months along now, unmistakably pregnant, and the baby's movements had grown strong enough that sometimes Gavin could feel them through the blankets at night. Eleanor had caught him more than once with his hand resting protectively on her belly while he slept. As if even unconscious, he was determined to protect the child growing there. Maggie began teaching Eleanor to knit, and Eleanor threw herself into making tiny sweaters, booties, and blankets. Her stitches were uneven at first, but they improved with practice. Gavin brought home soft flannel from town, and Eleanor sewed little gowns with painstaking care. They were building a nursery without ever discussing it, all three of them working together to transform the empty room into a space ready to welcome new life. Gavin built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and carving a simple design of mountains along the sides. Maggie contributed a handmade quilt in cheerful yellows and greens. Eleanor made curtains for the window and painted a small chest for storing baby clothes. Should we pick out names? Maggie asked one evening as they sat together sewing. You're running out of time to decide. Eleanor glanced at Gavin, who looked up from his book. They hadn't discussed names yet. It felt almost too presumptuous, as if planning that far ahead might jinx everything. What do you think? She asked him softly. Gavin set down his book, considering. I always liked the name Hope for a girl. My grandmother was named Hope, and she was the strongest woman I ever knew, survived things that would have broken most people. Eleanor's throat tightened. Of course, Gavin would suggest a name that meant something beautiful and optimistic. Hope Mercer. I like that. And for a boy? Maggie prompted. Samuel, Eleanor said without thinking. After my father. He wasn't perfect, but he loved me. He would have stood by me if he'd lived. Gavin nodded slowly. Samuel Hope Mercer or Hope Eleanor Mercer. Either one sounds right to me. The casual way he gave the baby his surname, claiming the child as his own without hesitation, made Eleanor's eyes sting. This man, this wonderful, impossible man, was giving her and her child everything without asking for anything in return. Except he had asked for something, Eleanor realized. He'd asked her to stay, to build a life with him, to let this arrangement become something real. And she was beginning to think she wanted that too. December arrived with a fierce snowstorm that kept them housebound for 3 days. The world outside became a white blur, and the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Gavin kept the fires burning constantly, and they all slept in extra layers. On the third night of the storm, Eleanor woke to find Gavin already awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. Can't sleep? She whispered. Just thinking. He turned his head to look at her in the darkness. Storm like this, anything could happen. If you went into labor right now, we couldn't get to Doc Morrison, couldn't get help. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her belly. She hadn't let herself think about that possibility. I'm not due for 3 more months. I know, but babies don't always come when they're supposed to. Gavin rolled onto his side to face her. I want you to know. If something happens, if it comes down to choosing between you and the baby, I choose you, every time. Gavin, I mean it, Eleanor. His hand covered hers on her belly. I know you think this is all about the baby, about giving me a family, but it's not. It's about you. You matter. Your life matters. Promise me that if it comes to that, you'll let the doctor save you. Eleanor saw the fear in his eyes, the genuine terror that he might lose her, and she understood then, with sudden clarity, that what he'd said after the dance wasn't just kindness or obligation. He really did care for her, maybe even loved her. The realization was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. I promise, she whispered. But Gavin, I care about you too. More than I thought I could care about anyone again. You've given me so much. He kissed her then, cutting off her words. It wasn't like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was deep and desperate and full of feeling, his hand cradling her face as if she were something infinitely precious. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring all her confused emotions into it, gratitude and hope and the beginnings of love. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Gavin rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it's too soon. I know you might not feel the same, but I need you to know. I love you, Eleanor, not just for the baby, but for you, for your strength and your courage and the way you've made this house into a home. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. I think I might love you too. I'm afraid to, but I think I do. Then don't be afraid. Gavin kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips again. We'll figure this out together. All of it, I promise. They held each other through the rest of the night, the storm raging outside while inside, something warm and precious and fragile was beginning to grow. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed, beautiful and white and new, like a fresh start written in snow. The morning after the storm, Eleanor woke wrapped in Gavin's arms, his body curved protectively around hers, even in sleep. Pale sunlight streamed through the window, reflecting off the fresh snow and filling the room with an almost ethereal brightness. For a moment, she simply lay there, absorbing the warmth of his embrace and the quiet wonder of what had shifted between them in the darkness. Love. The word still felt dangerous, like handling something fragile that might shatter if she gripped it too tightly. But lying there in Gavin's arms, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back, Eleanor couldn't deny what was growing in her heart. It wasn't the passionate, reckless infatuation she'd felt for Daniel Whitmore. That had been the foolish love of a girl who didn't know better. This was something deeper, something built on trust and partnership, and the quiet revelation of seeing someone's true character day after day. Gavin stirred behind her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Morning," he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." Eleanor turned in his embrace so she could see his face. In the bright morning light, he looked younger somehow. The worry lines around his eyes softened. "The storm passed." "So it did." Gavin's hand moved to her belly, where the baby was already stirring with morning activity. "How are you feeling, both of you?" "We're good." Eleanor placed her hand over his, feeling a particularly strong kick. "Very active this morning. I think someone's ready to meet the world." "Not for another 3 months," Gavin said firmly, though his eyes were tender. "You both need to stay right where you are until spring." A knock on the door interrupted them, followed by Maggie's voice. "Are you two decent? I've got breakfast started, but I need someone to bring in more wood." "Be right there," Gavin called back. He pressed a quick kiss to Eleanor's forehead before reluctantly pulling away. "Duty calls, though I'd rather stay here all day." "Go." Eleanor smiled, shooing him toward the door. "We'll have other mornings." After he left, Eleanor dressed slowly, marveling at how difficult simple tasks were becoming. Her body felt foreign to her now, swollen and ungainly, though Gavin insisted she was beautiful. She caught her reflection in the small mirror and saw a woman transformed, not just by pregnancy but by something deeper. The frightened girl who'd fled Philadelphia was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd learned to hope again. Downstairs, Maggie had prepared a feast. Flapjacks with preserved berries, bacon, and strong tea. She took one look at Eleanor's face and grinned knowingly. "So," she said, drawing out the word, "you two finally figured it out." Eleanor felt herself flush. "I don't know what you mean." "Please, the whole house practically glows this morning." Maggie flipped another flapjack with practiced ease. "I'm happy for you both, really happy. Gavin's been alone too long, and you deserve someone who sees you for who you really are." Before Eleanor could respond, Gavin returned with an armload of wood, stomping snow from his boots at the door. His eyes found Eleanor's immediately, and the look that passed between them was so full of warmth that Maggie actually sighed. "You two are going to be insufferably sweet, aren't you?" she teased. "Probably," Gavin said, not taking his eyes off Eleanor. "Better get used to it." The weeks between December and March passed in a way that felt both impossibly slow and frighteningly fast. Eleanor's body grew heavier as the baby developed, her movements becoming more labored. But Gavin was unfailingly patient, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, rubbing her aching back in the evenings, and reading aloud to her from his collection of books when she couldn't sleep. Their marriage had deepened into something Eleanor had never expected, a partnership marked by genuine affection and growing intimacy. Gavin was tender and careful with her, always mindful of her condition, but there was passion there too, carefully banked but real. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, his dreams for the ranch, her memories of the good parts of her childhood, the life they wanted to build for their child. Because it was their child now. Eleanor had stopped thinking of the baby as hers alone. Gavin had claimed this child so completely, with such unwavering commitment, that any distinction had ceased to matter. In late February, Eleanor woke one morning to find blood spotting her nightgown. Terror seized her immediately, and she cried out for Gavin, who was already awake and dressing for morning chores. He was at her side in an instant, his face going pale when he saw the stain. "Don't move. I'm getting Doc Morrison." "Gavin, the roads? I don't care if I have to dig through 10 feet of snow. I'm getting the doctor." His jaw was set with determination, but his hand trembled as he touched her face. "You stay in bed. Maggie will look after you. I'll be back as fast as I can." He was gone before Eleanor could argue, and moments later Maggie rushed in, her face tight with worry. "What happened?" Eleanor explained through tears, and Maggie's expression grew serious but not panicked. "All right. First thing is not to borrow trouble. Sometimes women spot during pregnancy and everything turns out fine. Let's get you comfortable and wait for the doctor. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Eleanor's life. Maggie brought her tea and cool compresses, checked on her constantly, and tried to keep her calm with cheerful chatter. But Eleanor couldn't shake the fear that gripped her. After everything, after finding safety, after building a new life, after discovering love where she'd least expected it, was she going to lose the baby now? She placed both hands on her belly, feeling for movement. The baby kicked in response, strong and insistent, and Eleanor let out a sob of relief. "Still active?" Maggie asked, settling on the edge of the bed. "Yes, thank God." "Oh, Maggie, what if something's wrong? What if I lose?" "Don't think like that." Maggie gripped her hand firmly. "You're strong. The baby's strong. We'll get through this." It was well past noon when Eleanor finally heard the sound of horses outside. Gavin burst through the door moments later, followed by Doc Morrison carrying his medical bag and looking windblown but competent. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, immediately all business. "Let's have a look at you. Maggie, I'll need hot water and clean towels. Gavin, you wait downstairs." "I'm staying," Gavin said flatly. "Gavin," Eleanor started. "I'm staying," he repeated, his eyes finding hers. "Unless you want me to go?" Eleanor shook her head. She wanted him there, wanted his solid presence and steady strength. "Stay." Doc Morrison examined her thoroughly, his weathered face giving nothing away. The waiting was agony, every second stretching into eternity, while Eleanor tried to read his expression for clues. Finally, he straightened up and gave her a reassuring smile. "Baby's heartbeat is strong and steady. Position feels good. The spotting you had, it's not uncommon this late in pregnancy. Sometimes the cervix becomes irritated or a small blood vessel breaks. Doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong." Eleanor felt dizzy with relief. "The baby's all right?" "From what I can tell, yes. But I want you on complete bed rest for at least a week, maybe 2. No lifting, no housework, minimal walking. Let that baby settle and give your body a chance to stabilize." He looked at Gavin. "Can you manage that?" "Whatever she needs." Gavin's voice was hoarse. "Good. I'll come back in 3 days to check on her. In the meantime, any more bleeding, any pain, any decrease in the baby's movement, you come get me immediately, weather be damned." Doc Morrison packed up his bag. "You're doing well, Mrs. Mercer. Try not to worry. Stress isn't good for you or the baby." After he left, Eleanor let out a shaky breath. Gavin sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart racing. "I was so scared," he whispered into her hair. "Riding into town, I kept thinking about what I'd do if I lost you. And Eleanor, I can't. I'm here. We're both here." Eleanor held him just as tightly. "I'm not going anywhere, Gavin. I promise." He pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes suspiciously bright. "I rode like a madman through 2 feet of snow to get the doctor. Pretty sure I scared poor Doc Morrison half to death when I pounded on his door." "My hero," Eleanor said softly, meaning it with her whole heart. The enforced bed rest was maddening. Eleanor, who'd grown accustomed to being active and useful, chafed at lying still while Maggie and Gavin managed everything. But she obeyed the doctor's orders because she couldn't risk anything happening to the baby. Gavin moved his entire life to their bedroom for those 2 weeks. He brought his books and read to her. He carried her meals upstairs and ate with her. At night, he held her close, one hand always resting protectively on her belly. They talked about everything, his childhood in Illinois, her memories of her mother who'd died when she was young, their hopes for their child's future. "I want them to be happy," Eleanor said one evening, her hand covering Gavin's on her belly. "I want them to grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they can be whoever they want to be." "They will be." Gavin's voice was certain. "We'll make sure of it. And they'll grow up knowing that sometimes the family you build is even stronger than the family you're born into." When Doc Morrison finally cleared Eleanor for gentle activity, she was nearly 8 months pregnant and enormous. Moving around required effort, and she tired easily, but the baby remained active and healthy. The nursery was complete now, waiting only for its occupant. Everything was ready. Except Eleanor, who found herself increasingly anxious as her due date approached. What if something went wrong during the birth? What if she wasn't a good mother? What if the baby sensed somehow that she'd been afraid at first, that she hadn't been ready. "You're going to be wonderful," Gavin assured her one night when she voiced her fears. "I've watched you these past months. You're patient and kind and so strong. Our baby is lucky to have you." "Our baby," Eleanor repeated, loving how naturally he said it. "Do you really think of them that way? As truly yours?" Gavin's hand splayed across her belly, his expression fierce. "Eleanor, I felt this baby kick for the first time. I've felt them grow and move and become a person. I've built their cradle and painted their room and lain awake at night worrying about their future. Blood doesn't make someone a parent, love does, and I already love this child more than I can put into words." Eleanor was crying now, hormones and emotion overwhelming her. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You survived," Gavin said simply. "You were brave enough to keep going when everything fell apart. You gave me a second chance at happiness. That's more than enough." The first labor pains came on a bright morning in late March, 2 weeks before Doc Morrison's predicted due date. Eleanor woke to a cramping sensation low in her back, different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. She lay still for a moment, trying to assess whether this was really it. Then her water broke, soaking through her nightgown and the sheets beneath her, and she knew. "Gavin," she said, trying to keep her voice calm even as panic threatened to swallow her. "Gavin, it's time." He was up instantly, alert despite having been sound asleep moments before. "You're sure?" "Very sure." Another contraction gripped her, stronger than the first, and Eleanor gasped. "Oh God, it's really happening." All right, don't panic." Gavin was pulling on clothes with shaking hands, his voice steady even though his face had gone white. "I'm getting Doc Morrison. Maggie will stay with you. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine." He pressed a hard kiss to her forehead and was gone, his boots thundering down the stairs. Eleanor heard him shouting for Maggie, heard the frantic activity below, and then Maggie was there, her face calm and competent. "Let's get you into a clean nightgown," she said. "Then we'll time the contractions and see where we are." The pains came irregularly at first, sometimes 5 minutes apart, sometimes 10. Eleanor paced the bedroom between contractions, following Maggie's advice that movement would help things progress. Every time she looked out the window at the empty yard, she willed Gavin to appear with the doctor. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked during a break between contractions. "What if the baby—" "No." Maggie took both her hands firmly. "None of that. You're strong and healthy. The baby's strong and healthy. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. You're going to be fine." But as the hours wore on and the contractions grew stronger and closer together, Eleanor's fear mounted. The pain was becoming overwhelming, radiating from her back around to her belly in waves that stole her breath. She gripped Maggie's hand through each one, trying not to cry out but failing as they intensified. "Where's Gavin?" she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "He should be back by now." "The doctor probably needed time to gather his things. They'll be here soon." But Maggie's eyes kept darting to the window, betraying her own worry. Another hour passed. The contractions were 3 minutes apart now, lasting over a minute each. Eleanor was drenched in sweat, her hair plastered to her face, and the pain had become all-consuming. She could think of nothing but surviving each wave, counting breaths, trying to remember everything Doc Morrison had told her about the birthing process. Finally, she heard horses outside and Gavin's voice. Relief flooded through her even as another contraction seized her body. Doc Morrison appeared in the doorway, calm and unhurried despite having ridden hard to get there. "Well now, Mrs. Mercer, let's see how you're progressing." What followed became a blur of pain and exhaustion and desperation. Doc Morrison examined her and announced she was doing well but had several hours yet to go. Gavin appeared at her side, his face stricken at seeing her in such pain, and took her hand in both of his. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm not going anywhere. You can do this, Eleanor. You're the strongest person I know." "It hurts," she sobbed. "Gavin, it hurts so much." "I know, sweetheart. I know." He pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. "But soon we'll have our baby. Soon all of this will be worth it." The afternoon dragged into evening. Eleanor existed in a world narrowed to the space between contractions, brief moments of respite before the next wave of agony crashed over her. She walked when Doc Morrison told her to walk, lay down when he told her to rest, pushed when he said it was time to push. Through it all, Gavin stayed beside her, his presence the only anchor in the storm of pain. "I can see the head," Doc Morrison announced. "Eleanor, next contraction. You need to push as hard as you can. This baby's ready to meet you." Eleanor gathered every ounce of strength she had left and bore down, feeling as if her body might split apart. She heard herself screaming but couldn't stop, couldn't do anything but push and pray and hold on to Gavin's hand like a lifeline. "Again," Doc Morrison commanded. "One more big push." Eleanor pushed with everything she had, and suddenly there was a release, a sense of something vital leaving her body. Then, blessed sound, a baby's cry filled the room, thin and outraged and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Doc Morrison said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "A healthy baby girl." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "Is she all right? Is she really all right?" "She's perfect." Doc Morrison was wrapping the baby in a clean blanket, his movements efficient. "Good strong lungs, good color, all her fingers and toes. She's small but healthy." He placed the tiny bundle in Eleanor's arms, and she looked down at her daughter for the first time. The baby had stopped crying and was blinking up at her with unfocused blue eyes, her little face scrunched and red. She had a shock of dark hair plastered to her head, and when Eleanor touched her tiny hand, her fingers wrapped around Eleanor's thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, Hope," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm your mama." Beside her, Gavin made a choked sound. Eleanor looked up to find tears streaming down his face as he stared at the baby with an expression of pure wonder. "She's so small," he breathed. "Eleanor, she's so perfect." "Do you want to hold your daughter?" Eleanor asked softly. Gavin's eyes met hers, and everything he felt was written clearly on his face: love and awe and fierce protectiveness. He reached out with trembling hands as Eleanor carefully transferred the baby to his arms. The moment Hope settled against Gavin's chest, something fundamental shifted in the room. He cradled her with infinite gentleness, his large hands supporting her tiny body, and when he looked down at her, there was no question, no doubt, no distinction between biology and choice. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been waiting for you. We both have. And I promise you, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how loved you are, how wanted, how precious." Hope made a small sound, and one tiny fist escaped the blanket to wave in the air. Gavin caught it gently, marveling at the miniature perfection of her fingers. "She knows you," Eleanor said softly. "She knows her papa." Gavin's eyes lifted to meet Eleanor's, and the love in them took her breath away. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for her. Thank you for giving me this." "We gave it to each other," Eleanor corrected. She was exhausted beyond measure, her body aching everywhere, but watching Gavin with their daughter filled her with a joy so profound it hurt. "We built this together." Doc Morrison finished his work, making sure Eleanor was healing properly and giving instructions for her recovery. Maggie hovered nearby, her eyes damp as she watched her brother with the baby. "Can I hold my niece?" she asked hopefully. Gavin carefully transferred Hope to his sister's eager arms, though he hovered close as if reluctant to let the baby out of his sight. Maggie cooed over the infant, proclaiming her the most beautiful baby ever born, while Gavin returned to Eleanor's side. "How are you feeling?" he asked, brushing sweat-dampened hair back from her face. "Tired, sore, happy." Eleanor caught his hand and brought it to her lips. "Thank you for being here, for staying with me through all of it." "Where else would I be?" Gavin leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You were so brave, Eleanor, so strong. I've never been more in awe of anyone in my life." "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have." His eyes were serious. "But I'm grateful you didn't have to. I'm grateful for all of this, for you, for Hope, for the family we've made together." Doc Morrison packed up his instruments and gave final instructions. "Mrs. Mercer needs rest and good food to rebuild her strength. The baby should nurse every few hours. Maggie can help if you have trouble. I'll come back in 3 days to check on both of them, but I expect everything will be fine. You did good work today, all of you. After he left, Maggie reluctantly surrendered Hope back to Eleanor for her first nursing. The baby latched on instinctively, and Eleanor marveled at the sensation, at the absolute rightness of nourishing this life she'd carried for 9 months. Gavin sat beside them on the bed, watching with tender fascination. "She's really here," he said wonderingly. "Our daughter is really here." "Hope Eleanor Mercer," Eleanor said, trying out the full name. "It suits her, doesn't it?" "It's perfect. She's perfect." Gavin's finger traced gently down the baby's soft cheek. "Everything is perfect." That night, after Hope had been fed and changed and settled into her cradle, Eleanor lay in bed with Gavin beside her, both of them too exhilarated to sleep despite their exhaustion. Every few minutes, one of them would get up to peer into the cradle, checking that Hope was still breathing, still peaceful, still real. "I can't believe she's ours," Eleanor whispered during one of these checks. "I can't believe this is our life now." "Believe it." Gavin wrapped his arms around her from behind as they stood over their sleeping daughter. "Eleanor Hayes, who was, Eleanor Mercer, who is, you boarded a train carrying a secret and a prayer. You thought you were coming west to one future, but you found a different one entirely." "A better one," Eleanor said with certainty. She turned in his embrace to face him. "I thought my life was over when Daniel abandoned me. I thought I'd destroyed any chance at happiness, but I was wrong. I just had to travel 2,000 miles to find where I actually belonged." "With me," Gavin said, though there was a question in it. "With you," Eleanor confirmed. "With our daughter. With our family." She reached up to cup his face. "I love you, Gavin Mercer, not because you saved me, not because you gave me a home, but because of who you are. Because you saw me at my lowest and chose to lift me up. Because you claimed a child that wasn't yours by blood and loved her anyway. Because you're good and kind and the finest man I've ever known." Gavin kissed her then, soft and reverent, pouring all his love into it. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I loved you before Hope was even born," he confessed. "The moment I saw you on that train platform, looking lost and scared and so damn brave, something in me recognized something in you, like my soul had been waiting for yours." "That's dangerously romantic for a practical man," Eleanor teased gently. "You bring out the romantic in me." He kissed her again. "Come on, let's get some sleep while we can. Something tells me our daughter has plans to keep us very busy." He was right. Hope proved to be a demanding but otherwise easy baby, waking every few hours to nurse but settling back to sleep quickly. Eleanor and Gavin took turns rising with her at night, though more often than not they both woke, neither wanting to miss a moment of their daughter's first days. The ranch work didn't stop for new parenthood. Gavin still had cattle to tend and fences to mend, but he arranged his schedule so he was never gone long. He came home for lunch every day just to hold Hope for a few minutes, his face transforming with joy every time she wrapped her tiny fingers around his. Neighbors came to visit, bearing gifts and congratulations. Martha Henderson brought a stack of baby quilts. Judith Winters arrived with jars of preserved fruit and a knowing smile. Even Reverend and Mrs. Fletcher made the trip from town, pronouncing Hope a blessing and offering their support. If anyone counted backwards from the wedding date and reached conclusions about Hope's parentage, they were polite enough not to say so in the Mercers' hearing. And truly, looking at Gavin with his daughter, watching the absolute devotion in his eyes, it was impossible to believe she was anything other than his completely. Spring spread across the Montana Valley in waves of green and gold. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadows, and the snow retreated from all but the highest peaks. Eleanor regained her strength gradually, and soon she was back to helping with the household chores, though now she did so with Hope sleeping in a sling against her chest or napping in the basket they kept wherever Eleanor was working. On a warm afternoon in early May, Eleanor carried Hope out onto the porch where Gavin sat repairing a bridle. He looked up as they approached, and his entire face lit up. The expression Eleanor had come to think of as his Hope smile, reserved exclusively for moments with his daughter. "How are my girls?" he asked, setting aside his work to make room for them beside him. "We're wonderful." Eleanor settled onto the bench, adjusting Hope in her arms so Gavin could see her face. The baby was awake and alert, tracking movement with increasingly focused eyes. She smiled today, a real smile, not just gas. Did she? Gavin's voice went soft and wondering. Show Papa, Hope. Give me one of those smiles. As if she understood, Hope's little face scrunched up and then smoothed into an unmistakable smile, her eyes locking onto Gavin's face. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. There's my girl, he murmured, touching her cheek with one gentle finger. You're going to break hearts someday, aren't you? You already broke mine. Eleanor watched them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was everything she'd never known she needed. Not wealth or social standing or the approval of society, just this, a good man, a precious child, and a home built on honesty and love. Gavin, she said softly, do you remember what you told me on our wedding night? About how you couldn't give me children? He looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. Of course. Well, you were wrong, Eleanor smiled at his bewilderment. You gave me hope. You gave me a family. You gave me a future I didn't think I could have. That's everything, Gavin. That's more than enough. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by tears. Eleanor, I know we said this was practical. I know we agreed it was just an arrangement. Eleanor shifted Hope to one arm so she could take Gavin's hand with the other. But somewhere along the way, you became my best friend. You became the person I want to share everything with. Every joy, every hardship, every quiet evening. You became my home, Gavin. Not this ranch, not Montana. You. Gavin pulled her close, careful of the baby between them, and kissed her with a tenderness that made Eleanor's soul sing. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet, but his smile was radiant. You know what the funny thing is, he said. I thought I was saving you that day at the train station, but you saved me too. You took a man who'd given up on love and taught him how to hope again. You brought light back into my life. You gave me purpose beyond just survival. He looked down at Hope, then back at Eleanor. You gave me everything. They sat together in the Montana sunshine, watching their daughter discover the world, and Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd left Philadelphia in disgrace, carrying shame and fear and a desperate hope for survival. She'd buried one dream at a stranger's grave and married another stranger out of desperation. But that desperation had led her to love. That fear had led her to courage. That shame had been washed away by acceptance and grace. Do you ever regret it? Gavin asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. Coming west? Marrying me? Eleanor thought about Daniel Whitmore and the life she'd thought she wanted. She thought about Philadelphia society and the expectations that had nearly crushed her. She thought about the girl she'd been, so young and naive and unprepared for how cruel the world could be. Then she looked at the man beside her, strong and honest and endlessly patient, and at the baby in her arms, the daughter she'd been afraid to want but now couldn't imagine living without. She thought about Maggie's friendship and Judith Winters' hard-won wisdom and the community that had welcomed her despite knowing her story. She thought about the mountains that watched over their valley and the wide Montana sky that promised endless possibilities. Not for a single second, Eleanor said with absolute certainty. This is where I was always meant to be. With you. With hope. This is home. Gavin kissed her forehead, her temple, her lips. Thank God you got on that train, he whispered. Thank God you were there when I got off it, Eleanor replied. Hope made a small sound, drawing both their attention. Her blue eyes, Gavin's eyes now, though Eleanor knew they might darken as she grew, blinked solemnly at her parents. Then she yawned hugely, her tiny mouth opening wide, and both adults laughed at her expression. I think someone's ready for a nap, Eleanor said. Let me take her. Gavin reached for his daughter, cradling her against his chest with practiced ease. You rest for a while. You've been on your feet all day. Eleanor watched as he stood and began to walk slowly along the porch, swaying slightly, humming a wordless tune that made Hope's eyes drift closed. This man, her husband, her partner, her love, had taken on a child who wasn't his by blood and loved her as fiercely as any father could. He'd taken on a frightened, desperate woman and seen her potential instead of her mistakes. That evening, after Hope was asleep in her cradle and Maggie had retired to her room, Eleanor and Gavin sat together by the fire. The spring air was still cool after sunset, and the warmth was welcome. Eleanor curled against Gavin's side, his arm around her shoulders, and thought about the year that had passed since she'd left Philadelphia. "You know what day it is?" she asked quietly. "May 15th. Why?" "It was May 15th when I wrote to Henry Callahan accepting his proposal. 1 year ago today, I set in motion everything that led me here." Eleanor tilted her head to look at Gavin. "I wrote that letter thinking I was choosing survival. I had no idea I was actually choosing happiness." Gavin's arm tightened around her. "I'm glad Henry wrote that advertisement. I'm glad you answered it. I'm even glad, as terrible as it was, that he died before you arrived." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because if he hadn't, I never would have met you. You would have married him, and I'd still be alone. And Hope would have grown up with a different father, and I can't imagine that world anymore. I don't want to." "Neither do I." Eleanor thought about Henry Callahan sometimes, the man she'd never met who'd inadvertently given her this life. "I hope he's at peace. I hope he knows that even though we never married, his kindness still saved me. It brought me to you." "We should take Hope to visit his grave someday," Gavin said thoughtfully. "When she's older. Tell her about the man who started this all, even if he never knew what he'd begun." Eleanor nodded, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'd like that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. In the quiet, Eleanor could hear Hope's soft breathing from the cradle near their bedroom, the gentle sound of her daughter sleeping peacefully. It was a sound she'd never tire of, a reminder that despite everything, she'd been given a second chance at life and love. "Eleanor?" Gavin's voice was drowsy but content. "Hmm? Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life, for choosing us." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "Thank you for giving me something worth choosing." Outside, the Montana night settled over their valley, stars emerging one by one in the vast darkness. Inside, a fire burned warm, a baby slept safe, and two people who'd found each other through chance and desperation held each other close, their hearts full of gratitude for the unexpected grace that had brought them together. The mail-order bride who'd carried her own secret had found a cowboy ready to be a father to them both. She'd traveled west, expecting nothing more than survival, and had discovered, instead, that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones built on honesty, partnership, and the courage to hope again when hope seems lost. In the morning, there would be work to do, cattle to tend, meals to cook, a baby to raise. There would be hard winters and difficult seasons, challenges and setbacks, and all the ordinary struggles of building a life in an unforgiving land. But they would face it together, this family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment and love. And that, Eleanor knew with certainty as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, was the greatest gift of all. Their story, born of loss, built on trust, and sealed with love, was complete. But their life together, their journey as husband and wife and parents, was only just beginning. And Eleanor Mercer, who had once been Eleanor Hayes of Philadelphia, couldn't wait to see where it would lead them next.